Chapter 980. The Battle of the Five Poisons lasted for 30 years. Looking at it now, it was a calamity for the Five Poison world. We killed the previous venerable sage, and quickly swept away all the opposing forces. The first thing Senior Brother did, after ascending the venerable sage throne, was to change the era to the Black Lotus first year. Black Lotus first year. Sumo and Wang Yu frowned. At that time, I did not know about the Black Lotus, but I did not ask. What the era name was not important to me. Senior Brother took away the autonomy of the Five Poison envoys, but he still conferred titles to them. But what I did not expect was that he still conferred me the title of Lady Scorpion, and built this immortal Scorpion Palace on the Five Poison Star. I can live here. He did not confer you the title of Venerable Sage Queen? Shen Ming asked. No. Lady Scorpion shook her head. I asked him before. His answer was, the world has just been settled, and it is not easy to confer titles, otherwise people's hearts will change, and the political situation will become unstable. When everything is stable, he will announce it to the entire Five Poison world. Wang Yu laughed coldly, gathering troops to rebel, killing the emperor. He even dared to do such things. Why would he be afraid of people's hearts changing? Actually, I had the same thoughts at that time. But I still followed his wishes, and moved into the immortal Scorpion Palace. At the start, he often came to see me, and gave me many cultivation resources. To be honest, although I was not conferred the title of Venerable Sage Queen, I had a very happy time. We could stay together every day, and there were no obstructions on the Five Poison Star. My cultivation increased by leaps and bounds, as if there was a formless energy constantly pouring into my body. Every 300 to 400 years, I would advance by a small realm. That feeling of cultivation constantly rising made me forget everything for a while. After a whole 3,000 years, my cultivation actually rose to the 9th stage of the Venerable Realm. 9th stage of the Venerable Realm, Lady Scorpion coldly repeated. But I neglected that the time between Senior Brother visits me became longer and longer, and the time we spent together became shorter and shorter. The smile on his face also became less and less. The day I advanced to the 9th stage of the Venerable Realm, he came to the immortal Scorpion Palace. Unfortunately, I didn't notice anything unusual at that time. Later on, when I thought about it, I felt that something was wrong. Senior Apprentice Brother is an extremely handsome man. However, on the last day we met, he seemed to be wearing a mask. His smile was stiff and his eyes were cold. That day, he brought a jug of wine to celebrate with me. At this point, Madame Scorpion picked up the wine bowl in front of her and drained it in one gulp. I am a greedy person. Madame Scorpion's gaze suddenly turned cold as she said fiercely, that day, that jug of wine completely destroyed me. There's poison in that bottle of wine. After drinking the flagon of wine, I fell into a stupor, and I do not know how long I slept. But I had a big, long dream. In the dream, my entire body was boiling hot, as if 10,000 ants were gnawing at my heart. In the dream, Senior Apprentice Brother was cursing me loudly. Speaking to this point, Madame Scorpion's body slightly trembled. That feeling from back then seemed to be unable to be erased from her soul. After I woke up, everything was different. My face was ruined, and my lower body had completely turned into a scorpion. Other than my realm, everything about me had changed. I do not know what happened. In the immortal Scorpion Palace, those cultivators and palace maids who served me were still there. But they did not know what happened. They could not recognize me, and fled in all directions. But I started a massacre, and in the immortal Scorpion Palace, blood flowed like a river. In the immortal Scorpion Palace, most of the cultivators were killed by me. I went crazy, and wanted to rush out of the immortal Scorpion Palace. But, in the entire immortal Scorpion Palace, there was a powerful restriction that only targeted me. Everyone else could escape, but I could not. That day, I saw the black lotus floating above the immortal Scorpion Palace for the first time. But no one else could see it. Madame Scorpion is crazy. This is a rumor that I only found out after I came back. Because I kept shouting for the black lotus. In the immortal Scorpion Palace, I shouted every day, my tears turned into blood. But no one replied. In the blink of an eye, another 3,000 years passed, and senior apprentice brother finally appeared. But he did not seem to be him anymore. That day, he wore a fitting black robe, and looked at me with extremely cold eyes. Together with him, there was a beautiful female cultivator that I had never seen before. That person, was he really your senior apprentice brother? Sumo frowned and asked. Because he felt that there was something fishy about this. That green snake senior apprentice brother did not seem to have a need to harm Madame Scorpion. Madame Scorpion laughed coldly. Actually, I thought so too. But I was sure that it was him. Because there were many things, other than him and me, no one else knew. Our vows of eternal love and all our secrets, he remembered them all. But he changed his mind. That day, he came to tell me that he had already bestowed that beautiful female cultivator as the revered Saint Queen. Was there a need for that? Wang Yu said, and why did he harm you? Because I no longer had any value to him. Back then, he only hoped to borrow my power in the immortal Scorpion Star. Also, he told me that, back then, I was the one who started the 5 Poison War. Only by punishing me would he be able to repay the world. Madame Scorpion said. At the same time, he told me that he had already bestowed a new secret emissary on the immortal Scorpion Star. I was already crippled. Ridiculous. Wang Yu asked again, but why didn't he just kill you directly? To amuse himself. Madame Scorpion said, or rather, to amuse his queen. Sumo and Wang Yu both frowned. That day, he asked that beautiful woman to whip me 3,000 times. He was drinking and laughing at the side. Madame Scorpion's voice trembled slightly. You still have your realm, can't you resist? Wang Yu said. No. Madame Scorpion said, because he had already advanced to the Lotus Night realm, and that beautiful woman was also a stage 9 venerable realm. They were enough to suppress me, not to mention that there was that special restriction. For a whole 100,000 years, they often came to the immortal Scorpion Palace. I became a toy for them to amuse themselves. The poisonous scars on my face were caused by the poisonous wine, and the other scars were all caused by their knife. I no longer have both arms. I don't know how many times my arms have been broken by them. Originally, I wanted to use my magical power to be reborn, but later on, I completely lost that desire. As she spoke, Madame Scorpion's clothes fell off her body. Her upper body was full of crisscross scars and layers of scale-like things. Her lower body was completely a scorpion. Her arms were completely non-existent, and her shoulders were black holes. It was too horrible to look at. Why? Wang Yu's gaze was extremely cold. Because she really did not understand why did that green snake king do this. He is worse than a pig or a dog. Shin Ming's eyes were also red. Sumo, on the other hand, tightly frowned, as if deep in thought. Ha ha ha, Madame Scorpion was naked. Actually, her body could no longer be called a body. She laughed maniacally. Using her thoughts, she rolled up the snakeskin wine pouch, and poured wine into her mouth from the void. The wine poured down like a waterfall, drenching her body, but it could not extinguish the endless love, hatred, grief, and anger in her heart. Chapter 981. The green snake wine pouch floated in the air, the wine pouring down like a waterfall. At that moment, Madame Scorpion wanted to go into a drunken stupor again, forgetting all the pain, forgetting what day it was. But the current her was already drunk. Cough, cough, cough. But the wine fell too fast, causing Madame Scorpion to cough. Then, the green snake wine pouch fell on the table. Wang Yu shook her head helplessly, finished the wine in her bowl, then opened her own wine jar. Then, how did you run out? Cough cough, hee hee. Madame Scorpion laughed bitterly. Then, they must have gotten tired of playing and stopped coming. That immortal Scorpion Palace's restriction also slowly faded. In their eyes, I was already a complete cripple. Gradually, I became lax in my restrictions. I finally found a chance to escape Immortal Scorpion Palace. When I just escaped, I once wandered around 5 Poison Star. But what I saw gave me a huge shock. Senior brother, he had already become a saint, and was singing happily every day. In the past, he promised me everything, almost all have not been done. On 5 Poison Star, anyone who disobeyed was immediately executed. Once I was discovered and captured by them. He still did not kill you? Wang Yu asked. No. At that time, I used my powers to return to my original appearance. But I was personally forced to drink poison wine by senior brother, then I was raped by that evil woman, and returned to my current appearance. Not only that, they even placed a black lotus curse on my body, making me forever like this. They did not kill me, they only wanted to torture me. They wanted to destroy my body and mind. That time, it could be said that I was completely destroyed. Madame Scorpion said, after that, I escaped to Immortal Scorpion Star, and hid in my previous cave, rarely going out. It was no secret that I was in Immortal Scorpion Sect's back mountain. However, I was like a forgotten and despised lunatic. No one paid any attention to me. The previous Immortal Scorpion Sect's sect leaders all kept their distance from me. Black Mountain was Immortal Scorpion Sect's forbidden ground. Xiao Wuzi also met me by chance. After that, he often came to see me. I once thought of dying. However, one of my former subordinates brought me a piece of news. He said that my senior brother has a pill formula that can break the curse on me. Therefore, I racked my brains and returned to 5 Poison Star several times before I finally managed to steal that pill formula. But now that he thought about it, that pill recipe was also a trap, because that pill formula used up all of my ingredient. However, for the past 1,000,000 years, I've relied on this pill formula to survive. With the recipe, I've always wanted to refine the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation pill. However, he had never succeeded. Until you guys showed up. Madame Scorpion calmed down a little. After saying that, she started to eat and drink. She put on her tattered white robe again. She finally emerged from her memories. You ate the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation pill just to get revenge? Sumo said. That's right. Madame Scorpion sneered. Half of the credit goes to me for the current 5 Poison Sacred Sect. Back then, if it wasn't for me, senior brother definitely wouldn't have succeeded. And now, I will destroy him and Glory Sect with my own hands. What stage is he at? Sumo asked. I'm not sure. Madame Scorpion said. He should be at stage 1. All these years, I've never heard of him breaking through. Lotus stage 1. Sumo nodded and did not say anything else. Actually, even if he was at stage 1, Sumo did not have the confidence to win. And could the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation pill really help Madame Scorpion reach the Lotus stage? What happens after you get your revenge? Wang Yu asked. Then? Madame Scorpion laughed hoarsely. Silly girl, what then? I will naturally turn into ashes and perish together with them. Is it worth it? Wang Yu asked. It's not worth it. Madame Scorpion shook her head and sighed. It's hard to tell if it's worth it or not. As long as it suits my heart, then it's all worth it. I don't regret what happened back then. Now I have no complaints even if I want to eat the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation pill. All of this is my own choice. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Wang Yu nodded heavily when she heard this. Then, she filled Madame Scorpion's bowl with her own wine jar. Madame Scorpion, I salute you. Wang Yu said. I salute your state of mind. Good. Madame Scorpion laughed. Then, the two of them clinked their wine bowls. Dang, they drained their wine in one gulp. Good wine. Madame Scorpion praised loudly. There's actually such good wine in the infinite realms? Ha ha. Old woman, to be able to drink wine like this, my life has not been in vain. Again. Wang Yu's expression did not change. She continued to fill Madame Scorpion's bowl. The two of them drank to their heart's content again. At this moment, this place seemed to have become Madame Scorpion and Wang Yu's home court. The two of them toasted each other. It was unknown how much wine they had drunk. In any case, Wang Yu's wine jar seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of wine. Madame Scorpion treated this as the last drink of her life. Thus, she drank to her heart's content and crazily. Wang Yu, on the other hand, felt sympathy for Madame Scorpion and willingly accompanied her. How much wine can your sister drink? Sumo quietly asked Xin Ming. I don't know. Xin Ming sipped his own wine while chewing on the spotted bear meat. But I have never seen her drunk before. One year, on a Milky Way day, there was a banquet in the Fantasy Fiend mansion. Father, mother, Qing Imo, Xing Fei, Yu Qiumu, Dong Wang and the rest were all there. But they fought in turns and in the end, they were all defeated by my sister. So powerful? Sumo was shocked. Of course. Xin Ming nodded proudly. My sister's alcohol tolerance is indescribable. But how is she so powerful? Sumo was confused. Even Mo Lang and Qing Mo couldn't win against her? I don't know why she is so powerful. Shen Ming shook his head. In any case, before she reincarnated, my sister drank day and night. She faced the distant stars and drank day and night without getting drunk. Shen Ming stole a glance at Wang Yu and said in a low voice, She misses brother Mu. My father and mother said that it is an illness and cannot be cured. Sumo smiled and nodded. Could it be that longing can be turned into wine? Plop! At this moment, Madame Scorpion suddenly fell to the ground and started snoring. She was finally drunk. Wang Yu's expression did not change. He held the wine bowl in one hand and his eyes were clear and deep. Xin Ming was not surprised by this scene, but Sumo was dumbfounded. Wang Yu's alcohol tolerance was really unbelievable. Demon King, it is not that longing can be turned into wine. It is that all wine can be turned into tears. But none of the tears can surpass the river of forgetfulness. So I am never drunk. Sumo knew everything about Wang Yu's past. Hearing this, she could not help but be silent for a long time. On the other hand, Shen Ming sighed again and again. All the wine of the worlds can be turned into tears. But how can the tears of the worlds rival the river of forgetfulness? Chapter 982. 7 days later. Madame Scorpion woke up from her drunken stupor. It was truly a good drunken stupor. In these 7 days, Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming sat in meditation and chatted, waiting for her to wake up. During this time, Wu Daoyong had also advanced to the 4th stage of Rebirth Realm. When Madame Scorpion woke up, Shen Ming specially prepared bear meat soup for her. Hi! Madame Scorpion drank a large bowl of meat soup, then looked at Sumo and the rest. What a dream! What a drunken stupor! What a meeting! Everyone, I am about to take the 9 deaths rejuvenation pill. If I can survive the 9 deaths, then we will meet again in 9 days. If not, then it can be considered fate. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Xin Ming did not say anything, because they had already said what they needed to say. They understood that Madame Scorpion had already made up her mind and could not change it. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyong wanted to say something but stopped. Madame Scorpion looked at Wu Daoyong. Little Wu, you are not bad. Although you are a bit timid, you are much stronger than the rest of the immortal Scorpion sect, and can be considered as loyal. I will give you this broken bag. Saying so, Madame Scorpion took out a storage bag from her tattered clothes. There are still many things inside. Basically, they are all venerable level items. If something really happens to me with the things inside, you will be able to survive in the 5 poison world. If you cannot survive, then you can follow them back to Greenwood Sect. Madam Scorpion threw the storage bag to Wu Daoyong. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyong directly kneeled on the ground, his voice trembling. This disciple hopes that you will return in 9 days. Madam Scorpion laughed. It is my good fortune that there are still people who remember me. Saying so, Madam Scorpion turned around and did not look back. She directly chose a relatively large cave room in the main hall and floated in. Behind her, countless scorpions of different sizes followed, densely packed. Madam Scorpion was like a scorpion king. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Many spiritual scorpions gathered together like a dark brown river. That cave did not have a stone door, but the spirit scorpions guarded the entrance layer by layer. The little spirit scorpion crawled on the big spirit scorpion's body, and in the end, only a 1-foot-wide hole was left. However, Sumo and the others could see it clearly. Madam Scorpion entered the cave and took out the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill. The scarlet pill was like a drop of flame, but it emitted a pungent smell. Madam Scorpion looked at the red orb and her lips curled up. She muttered to herself, "Senior brother, perhaps we will meet again soon. You must wait for me." Madam Scorpion's tone carried a sinister yet indescribable gentleness. Then, she waved her long sleeve. He directly swallowed the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill. As soon as the pill entered her mouth, Madam Scorpion let out a blood-curdling scream and fell to the ground. At that moment, she felt as if a fire snake had drilled into her throat. It was a fiery and fishy sensation. It was an indescribable feeling. Madam Scorpion had suffered greatly. The torture she had gone through back then was indescribable. However, even so, the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill made her retch violently. Cough cough, cough cough. Madam Scorpion coughed violently. Her eyes instantly turned red, but she did not cough out anything. The 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill had already fallen into her Dan-si. 61 library in an instant, she felt as if her entire Dan-si was ablaze. It was a fire that was burning from the inside out. The raging flames burned like a prairie fire. Sizzle, sizzle. However, to Madam Scorpion, the fire was like a life-threatening fire. Inside her Dan-si, a green mist rose. Madam Scorpion's Dan-si was being consumed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Her spiritual energy was disappearing. Madam Scorpion was mentally prepared for the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill's effect, but the speed of the pill's effect still exceeded her expectations. Madam Scorpion was hunched on the ground. Her body was sometimes curled up, sometimes trembling. At that moment, her entire body was emitting a faint red glow, as if she was being roasted by fire. Madam Scorpion closed her eyes and gritted her teeth. She tried her best not to scream, but the sound was rolling in her throat. Therefore, the whimpering sound was the cry of an injured beast. Outside the cave, Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming saw everything clearly. However, none of them had the ability to alleviate Madam Scorpion's pain. Moreover, they understood that the 9 births and 9 deaths were just the beginning. Madam Scorpion had to endure all of this to obtain her last chance. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours later, Madam Scorpion was already rolling left and right in the cave, screaming. That kind of pain was completely uncontrollable. She had to scream. Madam Scorpion's body started to bleed with golden blood. Then, the blood started to burn on her body, as if it was going to burn her alive. Madam Scorpion's screams did not stop. Her screams were heart-wrenching. Wang Yu's expression was still considered calm. Shen Ming, on the other hand, was already somewhat unwilling to continue watching. Therefore, Sumo waved her hand and directly set up a boundary in front of the cave. The sound disappeared. Spirit Scorpion, the cave, and Madam Scorpion were already in another boundary. Sumo and the rest were in the original hall. Phew! Shen Ming let out a long sigh. Madam Scorpion is really pitiful. That kind of torture, even I can't stand it. I really don't know how she can endure it. She relied on her obsession. Otherwise, she would not be able to endure it. Wang Yu said. Sis, do you think that Madame Scorpion will be able to endure it? 9 births and 9 deaths, I don't think she can even survive the first death. Shen Ming still had lingering fear when he recalled the scene just now. She definitely can, Wang Yu said. Why? Shen Ming did not understand. Because, if it is for my brother, I can also endure it, Wang Yu said. Huh! Shen Ming was stunned. How can that be the same? You love brother Amu, but Madame Scorpion hates her senior brother to the bone. What do you know? Wang Yu said disdainfully. Didn't you hear? Madame Scorpion calls him senior brother? Maybe, even she herself does not realize that senior brother is actually an obsession in her heart. Whether it is love or hate, I'm afraid she herself does not know. Everything she does revolves around that senior brother, isn't it? Oh! Shen Ming listened and nodded thoughtfully. Sis, what you said is so profound. But, I feel that it makes sense. Of course it makes sense, Wang Yu said, that Madame Scorpion did not let go. Otherwise, she would not be restricted, and could have left the 5 poison realm, but she did not. Her life and death is related to her senior brother. Shen Ming nodded, and Sumo could not help but nod. Wu Daoyu, who was at the side, let out a long sigh. Chapter 983. A whole 7 days. Sumo, Wang Yu, Shen Ming and Wu Daoyong sat in a corner of the hall. In these 7 days, Sumo and Wang Yu were stable, while Shen Ming and Wu Daoyong were unstable. Shen Ming was active by nature, but Wu Dao's weakness was his lack of concentration. At the same time, through his observation, Wu Daoyong knew that Sumo and the rest were hiding their cultivation. They were not disciples of the Greenwood sect, but were hiding their identities. But Wu Daoyong followed the principle of listening more and did not dare to ask too many questions. After all, in the middle of a group of powerful beings, staying alive was more important. In these 7 days, Sumo did not open the barrier. Because, in Sumo's opinion, if Madame Scorpion could not even survive the first 7 days, then she would not even be able to survive. So, he was not in a hurry to open the barrier. At this time, Shen Ming was not in the mood to meditate. He sat cross-legged with one hand on his cheek, deep in thought. What are you thinking about? Sumo opened her eyes and asked. Sigh. I'm thinking of something to eat. I'm a bit tired of eating bear meat. Shen Ming pouted, looking bored. I wonder how Madame Scorpion is doing? Actually, I want to get a few spirit scorpions and fry them. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Hee hee. Sumo laughed. Those spirit scorpions are Madame Scorpion's protectors, we cannot eat them. Then let's see Madame Scorpion. Finished, Sumo waved her hand. The barrier in front of them instantly opened a door. That door faced Madame Scorpion's cave room. At the entrance of the cave room, there were still spirit scorpions surrounding it. Layers inside, layers outside densely packed. But the round hole was still there. But the cave room was silent. They actually did not hear Madame Scorpion's screams. What's going on? Shen Ming stood up. Actually, she did not need to stand up, because everyone's consciousness could cover the entire underground celestial scorpion palace. This underground immortal scorpion palace did not have any restrictions. However, Shen Ming just wanted to go and have a look. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. However, as soon as she approached, those spiritual scorpions became restless. In an instant, almost all the scorpions turned around and charged at Shen Ming. At that moment, there was even a faint black aura surging from the bodies of those spirit scorpions. The hole from before was also shrinking rapidly. Just as Sumo had said, those scorpions were Madame Scorpion's guardians. They did not allow Shen Ming to get close to the cave. TSK. When Shen Ming saw this, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth. Stinky scorpion. I'll make a big pot of stewed scorpions and eat you to death. Shen Ming knew the severity of the situation and would definitely not step forward. The key was that these spirit scorpions could not block the divine senses of Shen Ming and the others. At this moment, Wang Yu also opened his eyes. The scene in the cave made them suck in a breath of cold air. Only half of Madame Scorpion's body remained, lying limply on the ground. The other half of her body had completely turned into black poisonous water. Sumo, Wang Yu, Xin Ming and Wu Daoyong frowned. At that moment, Madame Scorpion was really like a corpse, without any signs of life. She did not breathe, nor did she have any spiritual energy. There was only a faint layer of red light enveloping her body. However, Sumo and the rest knew that Madame Scorpion was still breathing. However, they did not dare to imagine, how could half of Madame Scorpion's body turn into poisonous water? Madame Scorpion did not cry out in pain, because she could no longer cry out in pain. Only half of her head was left. Half of her body was also left. Accurately speaking, she could no longer be considered a person, but half of her skin and flesh. However, even if she did not cry out in pain, they could imagine what kind of torture Madame Scorpion had endured for the past 7 days. They believed that 7 days was definitely inhumane pain. Madame Scorpion laid silently on the ground, and what was left of her body seemed to be continuously turning into poisonous water. Sumo and the rest saw that half of Madame Scorpion's scorpion tail was slowly turning into water. At the same time, Madame Scorpion's body was also twitching slightly. She seems to still be suffering, but she can no longer express it. Xin Ming frowned. Yes. Sumo nodded. 9 lives and 9 deaths, I wonder how many she has stopped. If she can survive the last 2 days, she will have succeeded. Chi. At this moment, the spirit scorpions at the entrance of the cave suddenly became agitated. At the same time, Sumo noticed that half of Madame Scorpion's body was melting at a faster speed. Chi. The black water on the floor of the cave actually made a swallowing sound. That was the sound of endless black oil frying half of the body. The sound echoed in the cave, strange and ear-piercing. Whoosh! At the same time, the spirit scorpions at the entrance of the cave suddenly turned into black smoke. Huh! Xin Ming could not help but be slightly stunned. Those spirit scorpions were delicacies. Why did they suddenly turn into smoke? Wasn't it a pity? Death substitution art. Sumo raised her eyebrows. Because he saw the black smoke that the spirit scorpions turned into had all entered Madame Scorpion's body. Death substitution art, as the name suggested, was a technique to substitute death. It seemed that this was a technique that Madame Scorpion had prepared beforehand. These spirit scorpions were dying in place of Madame Scorpion. If not for this technique, Madame Scorpion would not have been able to survive the final death. Looking again, the half of the body seemed to jerk violently, as if it had received an electric shock. Chi. The spirit scorpions at the entrance of the cave continuously turned into black smoke, starting from the first spirit scorpion. However, the spirit scorpions kept appearing, as if there was a spirit scorpion fountain at the entrance of the cave. The black smoke became thicker and gradually sealed the entrance of the cave. The black smoke had a special restriction that could block divine sense. In an instant, Xin Ming and Wu Daoyong could no longer see what was happening in the cave. Sumo and Wang Yu activated their demon eye and ghost eye at almost the same time. In the cave, the black smoke filled the air, and Madame Scorpion's body was gradually disappearing. It seemed that even with the death substitution art, Madame Scorpion could not block the effects of the 9 deaths rejuvenation elixir. Her final life was still going on. After a few hours, Madame Scorpion completely disappeared from the black smoke. There was almost no trace of her in the entire cave. Wang Yu, can you still see Madame Scorpion? Sumo asked Wang Yu. No. She has completely disappeared. Wang Yu frowned. Her aura is completely gone. From what I can see, it is just an empty room filled with black smoke. Me too. Sumo raised her eyebrows. Also, the black smoke is dissipating bit by bit. The spirit scorpions seem to have been used up. There is no more. Madame Scorpion is dead. Shen Ming asked anxiously. Sumo and Wang Yu did not answer. Because at this moment they did not know the answer either. However, the black smoke had not completely dissipated. They still had a glimmer of hope. As time passed, the black smoke slowly dissipated. No one knew where it went. However, Madame Scorpion's figure did not appear. Sumo and Wang Yu could not help but look at each other. After 2 days, the black smoke completely dissipated, but the cave was empty. 9 days had passed. Sumo and Wang Yu's expression darkened. Chapter 984. 9 Lives and 9 Deaths. There was only a sliver of chance of survival. Sumo understood that Madame Scorpion should have known about this when she decided to consume the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill. In truth, she took a huge risk to consume the pill. It was a gamble of life and death. 9 days had passed, the cave was empty. Madame Scorpion was dead, she did not succeed. She took away all the spirit scorpions that accompanied her day and night in the dark and stinky pond. Sigh. Sumo sighed, not knowing what to say. Wang Yu frowned. Tears rolled down Shen Ming's cheeks. In truth, they only met Madame Scorpion by chance, they did not have much of a history with her, they were not even friends. However, they saw Madame Scorpion's current appearance, heard her story, and witnessed her life and death torture. That was why they wanted to see Madame Scorpion succeed, to see her rejuvenation. However, not all stories in the infinite worlds had the most perfect ending. Sometimes, regret was a different kind of beauty. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyong knelt on the ground, then crawled forward. In truth, when Wu Daoyong first met Madame Scorpion, he thought she was a ghost. In the beginning, he was extremely afraid of Madame Scorpion. His obedience came from his initial fear, it was not sincere. Later on, he found out about Madame Scorpion's past, but it was not detailed. That was why, amidst his fear, he felt a sense of pity. However, he came into contact with Madame Scorpion with a sense of opportunism. After all, Madame Scorpion was a 9th stage venerable. Just giving him some benefits would be enough for him. After tens of thousands of years, he did achieve his goal. Slowly, he gained a bit more respect for Madame Scorpion. However, the fear was still there. The main reason why he brought Sumo and the others to meet Madame Scorpion was for himself. However, he did not expect Madame Scorpion to give him her storage pouch before she consumed the pill. That storage pouch was a treasure to Wu Daoyong. It was equivalent to Madame Scorpion leaving her final inheritance to him. That was why Wu Daoyong sincerely hoped that Madame Scorpion could come back to life. Even if it was only for 3 days. However, things did not go according to his wishes. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyue looked at the empty cave, tears falling like rain. Then, he kowtowed heavily, making a sound when he landed. At that moment, even Sumo was moved. A cultivator's entire life, so what? Madame Scorpion was a 9th stage venerable, even in the entire Izong realm, she was a top expert. However, what did she get in these millions of years? She might not even be as happy as a mortal. So what if he was an immortal? Fan, so what? Was her life worth it? Sumo had no answer in her heart. However, this was cultivation, true cultivation, cultivation from life to death. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyong wept in grief as he kowtowed and bled. Sumo and Wang Yu did not stop him. After all, this moment was a form of sincere friendship. The hall was empty except for the sound of crying. But suddenly, Xiao Wuzi, why are you crying? Ha ha! A clear and melodious laughter that sounded like silver bells came from the originally empty cave. Everyone was shocked, because they only heard the sound, but did not see the person. Sumo and Wang Yu's demon pupil and ghost pupil were activated. But they still did not see anything. Fragrance! Shen Ming was the first to shout. A faint fragrance suddenly spread out from the cave. It was the fragrance of a lotus. Looking again, inside the cave, 9 rays of light gradually appeared. This kind of light was extremely gentle and holy. This kind of light, Sumo had seen it on Li Shui's body. It was the light of a lotus. Inside the cave, wind started to blow. The 9 rays of light gradually converged, slowly forming the delicate and graceful silhouette of a woman. Madam Scorpion! Shen Ming shouted. Elder Scorpion? Wu Daoyong also stopped crying, looking at everything in a daze. Inside the cave, spirit wind blew, a strange fragrance spread. The underground palace of Immortal Scorpion Palace, originally cold and empty, was now filled with warmth. Sumo and Wang Yu were also excited. Because they saw hope. They knew Madam Scorpion may have succeeded. Chi-Chi, Hu, the spirit energy that formed the female figure, occasionally emitted sparks of light. The woman's appearance slowly became clear. Pure white like a lotus, beautiful like jade. At that moment, no one had any thoughts of blasphemy, only beauty. Then, a white lotus appeared under her feet. From the lotus, a golden light came out, landing on the woman's body, turning into a light yellow dress. Beautiful eyebrows, beautiful eyes, slender figure, endless grace. Inside the cave, a peerless beauty stood on top of the white lotus. Graceful and noble, peerless beauty. Sadly, whether it was Sumo, Wang Yu, Shen Ming, or Wu Daoyong, none of them had seen Madame Scorpion's appearance in the past. Madame Scorpion? Shen Ming opened his eyes wide. Elder Scorpion. Wu Daoyong forgot to get up, still kneeling. Hee. Madame Scorpion's beautiful eyes turned, smiling. What? Shouldn't I be Madame Scorpion? In the past, I was also considered a beauty. Saying so, Madame Scorpion waved her hand. A water mirror directly appeared in the void. In the water mirror, Madame Scorpion's endless beauty was naturally reflected. Oh? Madame Scorpion laughed happily. You look not bad as expected, it is still me from the past. Congratulations, Madame Scorpion. Sumo was the first to calm down, cupping her hands to pay respect to Madame Scorpion. Congratulations, Madame Scorpion. Wang Yu also cupped his hands with a smile. Madame Scorpion, you are truly a peerless beauty. Shen Ming loudly praised. Madame Scorpion laughed. Little girl, thank you. Then, Madame Scorpion waved her hand again. A gentle force directly supported Wu Daoyong to stand up. Xiao Wu, you are too kind. Elder, it is good that you have endured. Wu Daoyong said. Madame Scorpion sighed. That's right. I have endured. My dream of 1,000,000 years is finally about to be fulfilled. Saying so, Madame Scorpion turned her head to look at Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming. The 3 of you, are you disciples of the Azure Mountain Planet's Greenwood sect? Madam, you can tell? Sumo said. Madame Scorpion laughed and shook her head. Your techniques are very special. Although I am currently at the peak of the first stage of the Lotus Realm, I am still unable to completely see your true bodies. Just this point alone, I believe that you are not ordinary people. Moreover, if you were really ordinary Rebirth Realm disciples of the Greenwood sect, you would definitely not be able to refine the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill so easily. Madam, you are amazing. Sumo laughed. We are indeed not from the Azure Mountain World's Greenwood sect, we are from another world. Madame Scorpion nodded, but did not probe further. Everyone, I have said before that no matter where you are from, or who you are, as long as the pill is completed, you are all my friends. Now, not only is the pill completed, it has also helped me to rejuvenate. I, Madame Scorpion, will definitely repay this kindness. Although that dark spirit Scorpion King may not be what you want, I will definitely help you get it. It is definitely a treasure. At the same time, as long as your request does not affect my revenge, I am willing to do my best to help. Although I only have 3 days to live. Thank you, Madame Scorpion. Sumo laughed. We did not come here for anything important. Madame Scorpion, what do you plan to do next? Revenge. Madame Scorpion's words were simple and cold. Chapter 985. Five Poison Star was a special star. Even among the dark stars, it was a special existence. Because Five Poison Star was filled with poisonous gas. It could be said that it was a poisonous star. Five Poison Star's terrain was very special. It was mountainous, it was hot and humid. Its sky was always covered in a layer of grayish poisonous gas. It was said that this special characteristic made it more suitable for the growth of the five poisons. The headquarters of Five Poison Divine Sect was in an extremely primitive rainforest. In the center of the rainforest there was an ancient building that was tens of li wide. It was very simple and unadorned. It did not look magnificent, but the entire ancient building exuded a very special aura. Primitive and ancient. An ancient house, it was not eye-catching. A male cultivator with a handsome face and a well-defined body. He wore a black robe, sitting cross-legged inside the ancient house. The black robe was embroidered with golden patterns. Scorpion, centipede, snake, toad, lizard, the five poisonous creatures were all hidden in the patterns. Inside the ancient house there were not many decorations. The entire house looked very simple. Other than a praying mat, there was nothing else. This place was like a secret room used for meditation. The male cultivator had his eyes closed, as if he was cultivating, but at this moment, he suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was very special. At that moment there seemed to be a flicker of light, but it was quickly extinguished. His eyes were swallowed by darkness, then his lips curled into a cold smile. Then, he raised his right hand, middle finger, index finger, and thumb. A black lotus suddenly appeared. Pooh! The black-robed cultivator lightly blew. The black lotus floated up, passed through the wall, and flew out of the ancient house. At the same time, Madame Scorpion had already brought Sumo and the rest, stopping in a valley thousands of li away. That valley was a bit special. It was twisted and turned, the cliffs on both sides were like scales. The entire valley was long and narrow. If one looked from above, it would look like a dark brown snake. This is Dark Snake Valley. Back then, the 21 of us cultivated here. Madame Scorpion floated in the air above Dark Snake Valley, feeling a bit emotional. However, after the Great War, this place was the main battlefield. So, it was abandoned. Madame Scorpion said as she led the group forward. Soon, Sumo and the rest saw many traces of spells and divine weapons on the cliffs. So, on the walls of this valley there were many cave dwellings. However, those immortals' caves were all deserted. Occasionally there were remnants of spells, but they were like will-o'-the-wisps in tombs. The entire Dark Snake Valley was filled with the aura of death. Rather than a valley, it was more like a tomb. "Sis, what are we doing here?" Shin Ming asked softly from behind. "Didn't Madame Scorpion just say it?" "We're here to find the Dark Scorpion King," Wang Yu complained. "Didn't you hear? What are you thinking about? I wonder what's delicious on the Five Poison Star." Shin Ming pouted. "Five poisons on star. The five poisons on the Five Poison Star are all delicious," Madame Scorpion said from the front. "In a while, if we can find the Dark Spirit Scorpion King, there will definitely be other spirit scorpions or poisonous insects. As long as you know how to cook, we will definitely not lack ingredient." "Really?" Shin Ming's eyes lit up. "Of course," Madame Scorpion said. Shin Ming, who was initially disinterested, instantly became spirited. They made several turns. This Dark Serpent Valley could really be considered as 9 twists and turns. Finally, Madame Scorpion stopped in front of a rather spacious cave. Sumo and the others fixed their eyes on the cave and saw a strange talisman pattern carved in front of the cave. It was a scorpion crawling on the ground, but its single tail was raised high. "This place used to be my old abode," Madame Scorpion said slowly. "When the 21 people were cultivating, I cultivated here. It was also here that I gave my everything to my senior brother. This cave once had 9 floors." Silence. After a while, Madame Scorpion spoke again. "I know. After that battle, this place became the abode of the Dark Spirit Scorpion King. I once saw a Dark Spirit Scorpion King here. If I am not wrong, it should still be here. Madam Scorpion said. Today, I will take it and give it to the three of you as a token of my sincerity. As she spoke, Madam Scorpion formed a seal with one hand. Immediately, a small green snake jumped out of her palm. The small snake was not more than 7 inches long and only as thick as a thumb. However, it was extremely agile. The moment it appeared, it landed on the cliff and quickly crawled into the cave. Madam Scorpion, what snake is that? Shen Ming asked curiously. 5 Azure Snake. It is the favorite food of the Dark Spirit Scorpion. Its body could emit a strange odor. If the Dark Spirit Scorpion King is still in the cave, then it can definitely lure it out. At that time, I will have a way to capture it. Is the 5 Azure Snake delicious? Shen Ming asked. Madam Scorpion laughed and shook her head. I don't know because there are no cultivators on the 5 Poison Star who eat it as spirit food. Only the 5 Poison Star will eat the 5 Azure Snake. Smelling it, it seems to have a fishy smell. Oh! Shen Ming nodded in disappointment, then asked again, how is the Dark Spirit Scorpion King's battle power? It is around the Venerable Realm. However, its poison is very powerful. Even a high-level Venerable would have to avoid it. Otherwise, the 3-headed Spirit Scorpion King would have been captured long ago. Madam Scorpion said. Shen Ming nodded his head after hearing that. At this moment, a loud sound suddenly came from the cave. Boom! The entire Dark Snake Valley seemed to be shaking. Inside the cave, a living creature rolled out. Hee. Madam Scorpion laughed. Looks like that evil creature is still here. We made the right choice this time. The rest of you, stand back. You don't have to do anything later. Be careful, don't hurt you. Hearing this, Sumo and the other 2 naturally retreated. Boom, boom. The sound inside the cave grew louder, as if a giant monster was running out of the cave. Chi. Suddenly, the 5 Azure Snake shot out of the cave abode. It was fast enough that it resembled a slender green flying sword. However, just as it flew, a large green pincer flew out of the cave. That huge pincer was 100 feet long. It grabbed the 5 Azure Snake like a giant ape holding a needle. Originally, Sumo and the rest thought that the 5 Azure Snake would definitely be able to escape, because the gap between the pincer was more than a foot wide. However, they were wrong. Whoosh! The 5 Azure Snake was caught by the large pincer. More accurately, it was caught by the large pincer. Because after the pincer closed, it did not touch the 5 Azure Snake. However, the 5 Azure Snake could not escape. An invisible force stuck to it. Boom! Suddenly, the door of the Scorpion Cave was smashed open. An incomparably huge greenish-brown scorpion suddenly rushed out. There was still a lot of soil and stones on its body. It seemed that it had broken through many obstacles along the way. Once it appeared, it almost occupied the entire valley. When the 5 Azure Snake entered its mouth, the giant scorpion let out an extremely strange sound. At this moment, Madam Scorpion made her move. She took out a talisman. It was a fire-colored talisman. It expanded in the wind like a small sea of fire, directly covering the Dark Spirit Scorpion King. Chapter 986. Who, as soon as the fire talisman appeared, it covered the entire sky. Madam Scorpion's talisman suppressed the Dark Spirit Scorpion King. The light of the fire talisman seemed to make the Spirit Scorpion quiver. It was about to turn its head. However, the space in Dark Snake Valley was limited. The Dark Spirit Scorpion King was more than 100 zhang tall, so it was not convenient for it to turn around. At the same time, the immortal energy contained within the fire talisman started to suppress it. Chi. The Dark Spirit Scorpion King's body emitted a strange scraping sound. The voice was extremely hoarse and harsh. Sumo, Wang Yu, and the others couldn't help but frown. Looking again, the dark spirit Scorpion King's body had suddenly shrunk by 3 times. The light of the fire was glaring like the sun, and the entire dark Snake Valley was lit up. The dark spirit Scorpion King was naturally afraid of light. After shrinking its body, it naturally wanted to escape back to its cave. But Madame Scorpion was the ancestor of raising and controlling scorpions. Plus, this cave was where she cultivated. How could she let her go back? Madame Scorpion sneered and formed a seal with her hands. "Seal!" she shouted softly. The entrance of the Scorpion Cave suddenly lit up with a mysterious light. The runes that were originally broken and abandoned were suddenly awakened, as if they had been reborn. Profound light crisscrossed, dense like a net, and the Scorpion Cave was instantly sealed up. Bang, chi-chi. The dark spirit Scorpion King slammed into the mysterious light, and its 2 large scorpion pincers emitted a charred smell. The dark spirit Scorpion King was extremely venomous, but it was not a ferocious beast. It liked humidity and was afraid of light and special smells. At this moment, its heart was filled with fear, but this only aroused its ferocity. Because it was already trapped in the dark Snake Valley and had nowhere to go. It turned around and pounced towards Madame Scorpion. 2 large scorpion pincers went straight for Madame Scorpion. Hee. Madame Scorpion stood in the air and coldly laughed. "Evil creature, you are truly audacious. You actually dare to hurt your mistress?" Madame Scorpion waved her hand. As she waved her hand, 2 beams of yellow light appeared out of thin air and went straight for the 2 scorpion pincers. In the past, Madame Scorpion could command thousands of spirit scorpions, let alone now that she was in the Lotus Realm. As soon as the 2 rays of profound light appeared, they directly locked onto the 2 scorpion pincers. It was impossible for them to open. However, the dark spirit Scorpion King actually turned its claws into hammers and smashed towards Madame Scorpion. An evil gust of wind howled in the air. However, when the pincer was 3 feet away from Madame Scorpion's head, it suddenly stopped. "Humph!" Madame Scorpion sneered. Now, it was impossible for the dark spirit Scorpion King to hurt him. If it wasn't for the fact that she wanted to capture a live spiritual scorpion for sumo, Madame Scorpion could have killed it with a wave of her hand. Looking again, the dark spirit Scorpion King's pincers were useless, so it fiercely swung its tail. Scorpion claws and scorpion tails were the spirit scorpion's main attack method. The scorpion tail was over 100 feet long, and when it was raised, it looked like a long whip. The spirit scorpion's venom was mainly in its tail. Even a 9th stage Venerable Realm cultivator would be in danger if they were stung by the spiritual scorpion. Chi-chi, the scorpion's tail tore through the air. It seemed to be carrying lightning, and it was comparable to a top-grade supreme divine weapon. In the void, sparks flew in all directions. The power was extremely great. Sumo and the others, who were watching the battle from behind, frowned again. Even if Sumo wanted to subdue this spiritual scorpion, it would take her some effort. However, Madame Scorpion's expression was calm, and she was not afraid at all. She raised one of her hands and gently pinched it with her fingers. A lotus petal appeared on the tip of her finger. The lotus petal expanded in the wind, and instantly turned into a white giant shield. Bang! The dark spirit Scorpion King's scorpion tail slammed into the lotus petal. The lotus petal was unscathed, but the scorpion tail was directly repelled. The dark spirit Scorpion King could not break Madame Scorpion's technique. Chi-chi, squeak. The dark spirit Scorpion King's body vibrated once again, as if it was gathering all of its strength. Then, the scorpion tail coiled around the lotus petal, and it wanted to stab Madame Scorpion again. However, Madame Scorpion did not give the dark spirit Scorpion King the chance to do so. Seal! Madame Scorpion's hand seal changed. The lotus petal expanded once again, and it had a radius of 100 feet. It was like a sky curtain, and it fell on the dark spirit Scorpion King. In the face of absolute power, everything was useless. The dark spirit Scorpion King could not escape from Madame Scorpion's palm no matter what. Just as its scorpion tail moved, the lotus petal had already fallen. Whoosh! The lotus petal fell, and directly covered the entire scorpion. The scorpion struggled fiercely inside. However, no matter how hard it struggled, it could not break the lotus petal. At that moment, Sumo could not help but think, the power of the lotus warrior is really unbelievable. If I was sealed by the lotus petal, I might not be able to break free without Lianhua. At that moment, Madame Scorpion lightly shouted, "Retract!" Looking again, the lotus petal suddenly emitted endless white light, and then it quickly shrunk. 100 feet, 10 feet, 1 foot. The dark snake valley had almost returned to its original appearance. In the end, the lotus petal actually shrunk to the size of a palm. Madame Scorpion faintly smiled, and then opened one of her hands. Whoosh! The lotus petal directly flew over, and landed on Madame Scorpion's white and slender palm. The lotus petal glowed, and within the circle of light, there was a 3-inch scorpion that was crawling. However, it was no longer greenish-brown, and its entire body was shining with endless black light. "It's subdued!" Shen Ming was the first to shout. "Little brother, this is for you. Now, it has been completely subdued by me. In the future, this lotus petal will be its container, and I will also give it to you." The dark spirit Scorpion King is a wild animal. Because of its low intelligence, very few cultivators would take it alive. However, this is a living dark spirit Scorpion King. As long as you can control it, it will definitely be of great use. Saying that, Madame Scorpion shook her hand, and directly sent it in front of Sumo. "Thank you, Senior." Sumo did not refuse politely, and took it with both hands. Then, she directly put it in her cosmos sack. This dark spirit Scorpion King would definitely be of great use in the future. Finding the dark spirit Scorpion King for you, at least one of my worries has been lifted. Madame Scorpion looked in the direction of the 5 Poison Sacred Sect. "It is time for me to do my own things. Everyone, if there is nothing else, let us part here." Madame Scorpion looked at Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming and said, "This time, it will be a big battle. Life or death, victory or defeat, it is hard to predict. You don't need to get involved in this mess. Xiao Wu, you should also temporarily return to the immortal Scorpion Star to hide. If, within 3 days, I cannot return to find you, take care and take care of yourself." Elder Scorpion, Wu Daoyong naturally did not want to leave. "You coming with me will not help at all. If something happens, I still have to take care of you. If you don't go, it will definitely be beneficial to me." Madame Scorpion smiled and said. This, Wu Daoyong knew that Madame Scorpion was right. He was only a rebirth realm cultivator, in the 5 Poison Sacred Sect. He would be instantly killed. "Go!" Madame Scorpion did not say anything else, and directly waved her hand. Under Wu Daoyong's feet, a formation immediately appeared. Before he could react, the formation was already activated. Wu Daoyong instantly disappeared. Hee. Seeing this scene, Sumo could not help but smile. "Madame Scorpion, don't worry, the 3 of us will definitely not be your trouble. We definitely have the ability to protect ourselves. At the crucial moment, we might even be able to lend you a hand." And Madame Scorpion listened and nodded with a smile. "That's good. Let us go together to the 5 Poison Sacred Palace." Just as Madame Scorpion finished speaking, the sky above the dark Snake Valley suddenly changed color, and the sky suddenly darkened. A black lotus actually appeared out of nowhere, as big as a floating city. Chapter 987. The black lotuses stood in the air like a city. Looking up from the dark Snake Valley, one could only see black lotuses. That kind of pressure was suffocating. "Ha ha!" Madame Scorpion looked up and said coldly, "Senior brother, you came so quickly. Looks like I don't have to go 10,000 miles away. I can understand everything here." Whoosh! Madame Scorpion raised her eyebrows, and her body suddenly emitted white light. At the same time, a white lotus appeared on top of her head. The white lotus soared into the sky and expanded in the wind. Boom! The black and white lotuses collided. At that moment, Sumo's expression changed slightly. Because he did not expect Madame Scorpion to choose a lotus battle. Although Sumo was not a lotus warrior yet, the spell to materialize a lotus must be a top-notch lotus warrior's spell. Madame Scorpion's move was equivalent to using a big move. Sumo waved her hand and directly brought Wang Yu and Xin Ming out of the dark Snake Valley. Because if they were a moment late, it was very likely that they would be trapped in the valley. Sumo was right. Because at the same time they teleported out of the dark Snake Valley, the two black lotuses collided in the air. Black and white like two different worlds. Boom, rumble. It was a battle that even venerable realm cultivators had to avoid. In an instant, thunder rumbled and traveled 10,000 miles. The power of the black and white lotuses surged like an ocean. At that moment, it was as if an ocean exploded in the air. The world shook. Boom, hua! The dark Snake Valley, which stretched for hundreds of miles, instantly collapsed. Dust and smoke rose, as if a giant dragon was rolling in the endless mountain range. Endless waves of air rushed in all directions, destroying everything in the surroundings. The powerful beings on the Five Poisons planet were all shocked. Because ever since the last Holiness War, the Five Poisons planet had not had such a battle of power. 10,000 miles away, in the ancient buildings of the Five Poisons sect's headquarters, a dozen powerful cultivators instantly appeared in the air. They were all elders of the Five Poisons sect, and all of them were venerable realm cultivators. Looking 10,000 miles away, their expressions changed. The black and white light covered half the sky. The surging celestial force was still spreading, and the smoke was like an ocean as it rolled over. Lotus Force. A seventh stage venerable realm elder frowned. Is that the venerable sage's black lotus? But what was that white lotus? There was only one lotus knight in the Five Poisons world, and that was the venerable Five Poisons sage. But where did that white lotus come from? All the elders were stunned in the air. They looked at each other, but no one had an answer on their faces. However, they naturally thought of the catastrophe of the Five Poisons more than 1,000,000 years ago. Could it be that history was going to repeat itself? However, the current Five Poisons world was no longer the same as before. In this Five Poisons world, none of the dark envoys on any of the stars had the power to fight against a venerable saint. The Five Poison envoys were only at the 7th layer venerable realm. Their realms were about the same as Elder Five Poisons, so they did not have the ability to rebel. What was going on? Then, they all turned their attention to the unassuming old house in the Five Poisons sacred sect. They knew that the old house was the venerable sage's cultivation place. Other than the venerable sage's wife, no one was allowed to enter. It was the Five Poisons sacred sect's forbidden area. Meanwhile, the black-robed cultivator in the old house raised his eyebrows and slowly stood up. Lotus Force. The black-robed cultivator's lips curled up. Madame Scorpion, did you really become a Lotus Knight? How unexpected! Whoosh! He teleported and stood in the air above the venerable Five Poisons sage. His black robe fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were cold as he looked into the distance. However, there was a glimmer of light deep in his eyes, but it was instantly extinguished. Greetings, venerable sage. The moment the venerable Five Poisons sage appeared, the elders all knelt down in the air. Their eyes were filled with fear and respect. They knew that the venerable sage was the most powerful venerable sage in the history of the Five Poisons sacred sect. The Five Poisons world was tightly controlled by him. The number of elders who had died in his hands was more than the number of people kneeling in the void. He killed venerable sages as if they were ants. Thus, the venerable Five Poisons sage was the god of the Five Poisons world, and also the demon of the Five Poisons world. At the same time, a burst of licentious laughter came from the air. Following the laughter, a black-robed female cultivator appeared. Her black robe was also embroidered with the 5 poisons pattern. The 9th stage of the venerable realm. It was a slender woman with a face like a peach blossom. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were like ripples. Her long, curly hair draped over her shoulders. In between her eyebrows, there was a mark of a black lotus. The female cultivator could be said to be extremely beautiful, and within her beauty, there was a hint of seductiveness. If Madame Scorpion was as beautiful as a fairy, then this black-robed female cultivator was as beautiful as a demon. Is she back? The black-robed female cultivator stood next to the venerable 5 poisons sage. From the outside, the two of them looked like a perfect match. Greetings, madam. The elders kowtowed to the black-robed female cultivator, because they knew that the only person in the entire 5 poisons sect who could make the venerable sage listen to them was this incomparably beautiful Madam Venerable Sage. However, this woman was as beautiful as a flower, but her heart was like a snake. She was even scarier than the Venerable 5 poisons sage. Legend had it that Madam Venerable Sage ate human flesh and drank human blood. However, they had never seen it with their own eyes. That's right. She's back. The Venerable 5 poisons sage sneered. However, she seems to be different this time. She has formed a lotus. Oh? Ha! Madam Venerable Sage laughed, then looked at the Venerable 5 poisons sage meaningfully. Why? Are you afraid? Or are you finally reluctant to part with her? Reluctant to part with her? The Venerable 5 poisons sage looked at Madam Venerable Sage playfully. Why would I be reluctant to part with her? Don't you know how she's been all these years? But she has formed a lotus now? Madam Venerable Sage sneered. It seems that she has really refined the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation Pill, and it must be a supreme grade pill. Otherwise, she would not have formed a lotus. One must know that the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation Pill is a poison that causes 9 deaths. It is almost impossible for her to form a lotus. How did she do it? I also want to know. The Venerable 5 poisons sage said. Back then, you were the one who personally arranged the pill recipe. In these million years, she has indeed consumed a lot of energy and suffered a lot, but she has not succeeded. Perhaps someone has helped her. The Venerable 5 poisons sage's eyes reflected Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming. However, he could not see through Sumo's windwheel disguise technique. However, the Venerable 5 poisons sage was sure that the 3 cultivators were not the Venerable 5 poisons sage. There are guests from afar on the Venerable 5 poisons star. The Venerable Sage also saw Sumo and the others, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. The land of the Black Lotus belongs to the king. Who dares to come and offend us? Kill without mercy. That's right. The Venerable 5 poisons sage nodded slowly, then said to the people around him, Everyone, please follow me to eliminate the enemy and quell the chaos. Yes. The Venerable 5 poisons elders replied in unison. Whoosh! The Venerable 5 poisons sage waved his long sleeves, and the Venerable 5 poisons cultivators instantly disappeared. Not far away, a thin and tall cultivator in gray watched everything silently. Chapter 988. The Dark Snake Valley no longer existed. The black and white lotuses melted each other as they collided. However, the terrain within 1,000 miles had completely changed. The mountain was no longer there, only ravines. This place had completely become a battlefield created by the ripples of the lotus power. Madame Scorpion stood in the air, watching the black and white lotuses merge and disappear. Her eyes were cold. At that moment, she knew that she finally had the power to fight against her senior brother. Before the smoke had dispersed, the fighting spirit had returned. In the void, there was a fluctuation of spiritual energy. Looking again, more than a dozen cultivators appeared on the newly opened battlefield. The 2 people in the lead were both wearing dark gold black robe. Naturally, they were Venerable Five Poisons and his wife. Behind them were a dozen or so Five Poisons elders. Madame Scorpion knew half of them. The other half were newly selected and promoted elders. Madame Scorpion? Half of the elders frowned, because they all knew a thing or two about Madame Scorpion's past. After all, 1,000,000 years ago, Madame Scorpion had wreaked havoc in the Five Poisons sacred sect. However, he suffered a crushing defeat in the end. Since then, Madame Scorpion had never appeared on Five Poisons Star again. Who would have thought that she would return today? Lotus Realm? The elders were in disbelief. At the same time, their gazes wandered. It was because this was a matter of venerating saint. They did not know what to do. They could only watch as the two Lotus warriors fought. It wasn't that they were afraid of death, and it wasn't that they didn't care. It was just that they didn't have the ability to change anything. At this time, Venerable Five Poisons looked at Madame Scorpion and sneered. "It's been 1,000,000 years, and you're finally back?" Madame Scorpion looked at Five Poisons' supremacy with a complicated look in her eyes. Within the infinite worlds there were some people that couldn't be seen. For example, once Vast Ocean and Netherlord, and now Madame Scorpion and Five Poisons Lord. "Senior brother." Madame Scorpion's voice trembled. For 1,000,000 years she had hated this man. She had thought of countless reunions, and then how she would make her move. However, when this man stood in front of her, her heart involuntarily sped up. The first thing she thought of was how good he used to be. It was a bone-deep feeling. Even if, at this moment, that man was looking at her coldly. Kakik. Before Venerable Five Poisons could say anything, Madame Venerable Sage, who was beside her, laughed. "Madame Scorpion, I didn't expect that you would really return as a lotus. This senior brother is really full of tenderness. It seems like you've been living a good life for the past 1,000,000 years." Madame Reverend Saint mocked. "Why did you come back?" Five Poison Saint's expression did not change much as he coldly looked at Madame Scorpion. At this time, Madame Scorpion finally calmed herself down. Both of you, those who should return will return. What should be returned must be returned, and what should be reported must be reported. You should have been prepared. Naturally, I came back for revenge. Have you refined the 9 Deaths Rejuvenation Elixir? Venerable Five Poisons asked again. Otherwise, what does senior brother think? Back then, I was already a cripple. How could I still cultivate? Madame Scorpion's lips curled up. Senior brother's pill is truly amazing. A single pill had already helped junior sister reach the Lotus Realm. I really should thank senior brother. Although Venerable Five Poisons had guessed it before, he could not help but narrow his eyes when he heard it from Madame Scorpion himself. There was light in his eyes, but no one could see what it was. "But you only have 3 days," Madame Reverend Saint said fiercely. "Also, did they help you refine the elixir?" Madame Reverend Saint pointed at Sumo and the others with a cold and arrogant expression. Wang Yu and Shen Ming frowned. That was because they hated that expression. Madame Scorpion did not answer. In fact, she did not want to implicate Sumo and the others. Sumo looked at Madame Reverend Saint and smiled. However, her tone was extremely cold. "I was the one who refined the elixir. You will regret pointing your finger at me." Regret? Madame Reverend Saint's body moved slightly. Her smile was like a blooming flower. On the Five Poison Star, under the illumination of the Black Lotus, you dare to say that I will regret it? Let me tell you, I have never regretted it. That's because you haven't met me. Sumo's lips twitched. At that moment, a black light flashed across Sumo's eyes. For some reason, Madame Reverend Saint suddenly felt her heart palpitate. She had never felt that before. Who was he? Madame Reverend Saint had a bad feeling, but she could not see through Sumo's disguise. Venerable Five Poisons did not pay attention to Sumo and the others. He only looked at Madame Scorpion. "If you leave now, I will spare your life," Venerable Five Poisons said slowly. His tone was still condescending, as if everything was under his control. Madame Scorpion had to listen to him. However, it was a tone that Madame Scorpion hated. Back then, Madame Scorpion had become what she was today because she was too obedient. No one wanted to be a puppet, who did not want to live for themselves. Spare my life? Madame Scorpion sneered. Senior brother, you are so merciful. However, thanks to you, I have lived for 1,000,000 years. Why would I care about a mere 3 days? You have already reached the Lotus Realm. You can create your own world. Venerable Five Poisons looked at Madame Scorpion and said in a low voice, In the world you created, you can make time last forever. 3 days is like eternity to you. At that moment, Madame Reverend Saint could not help but turn to look at Venerable Five Poisons coldly. Because it was indeed a way to achieve eternity. Venerable Five Poisons actually pointed out a path to eternity for Madame Scorpion? At that moment, Sumo was also stunned. Green Snake? Madame Reverend Saint called out Venerable Five Poisons' nickname and sneered. What are you talking about? Have you forgotten who you are? Venerable Five Poisons ignored Madame Reverend Saint and looked at Madame Scorpion. Zihua, if you leave now, I will spare your life. Zihua. That was Madame Scorpion's real name. Currently, in the entire Five Poisons world, other than Venerable Five Poisons, only the Stage 8 Venerable Realm Elder behind him knew this name. Because that Elder was also one of the 21 people. Zihua? When Madame Scorpion heard this name, she could not help but laugh bitterly. Thank you, Senior Brother. You still remember the name Zihua? I thought that Senior Brother was like a devil, heartless and senseless. But how can millions of years of love and hatred be ended with just a few words from you? Today I will not leave. Either you kill me or I kill all of you. Madame Scorpion frowned. Her attitude could not be changed. Madame Scorpion, please leave. At that moment, the Stage 8 Venerable Realm Elder walked to the front and knelt on both knees. His voice trembled as he said, The Five Poisons should not face a calamity again. If the Lotus Warriors fight, the Five Poisons world will perish. Madame Scorpion looked at the Elder and lightly shook her head. She smiled bitterly. Yi Fu, do you really think that I should leave? I understand Madame's pain. Yi Fu's eyes were filled with tears. But if Madame leaves, you can protect yourself and the Five Poisons. If Madame is willing to leave, I am willing to commit suicide to relieve Madame's pain. This world is such a joke. Madame Scorpion looked at Yi Fu and shook her head again. Yi Fu, no matter when, you have never done anything wrong to me. Back then, when I was in despair, you still remembered our friendship and did not hurt me. Why are you asking me to pay with your life? Where is the justice? I don't need to protect myself, and the Five Poisons are no longer in my consideration. Today, I am just a vengeful woman. I don't care about the past and the people. Madame, Yi Fu still wanted to say something. But just as he opened his mouth, Madame Saint had already flown up. Her black robe was like an eagle, and the 5 fingers on her left hand pierced through Yi Fu's head like long hooks. Elder Yi, you talk too much. Madame Saint sneered. Red and white brain matter flowed down Yi Fu's face. Actually, Yi Fu could have dodged it, but he did not. Perhaps he wanted to die too. At the same time, he stared at Madame Scorpion and said, Madame, leave now. Saint. Boom, a black light flashed in Madame Saint's eyes, and she spread her fingers. When she looked again, Yi Fu's head suddenly collapsed, and his body turned into mist. A Stage 8 Venerable had been destroyed. The 5 Poison Saint's face was cold, and he did not move at all. Chapter 989. An 8th Stage Venerable was killed in the blink of an eye. Even Sumo did not expect that. The Saint Madame was indeed ruthless. At the same time, Madame Scorpion made her move. After all, she had 2 enemies. Madame Venerable Saint was her target. That woman used to be her nightmare. Whoosh! Madame Scorpion waved her sleeves and charged at Madame Venerable Saint. Her sleeves contained the power of the Lotus Realm. A ray of yellow light pierced through the air. The elders of the Five Poisons Divine Sect were startled. They quickly retreated. They did not want to bear the aftermath of the attack. In a battle of Lotus warriors, unless one was a special venerable, one would not be able to advance. However, the Saint Madame looked at Madame Scorpion coldly and did not move. She did not dodge, nor did she cast any spells. That was because someone was attacking on her behalf. Just as Madame Scorpion made her move, Five Poisons Divine Sect also made his move. He waved his sleeves as well. A ray of black light pierced through the sky and met Madame Scorpion. Boom, crack, the entire sky seemed to be shaking. It was as if the sky was going to split open. Two long sleeves collided, creating a huge shockwave that spread in all directions. The smoke that had just dissipated came back again. Luckily, the area within a 1,000-mile radius was already in ruins. The shockwave soared up into the sky. In the sky, Madame Scorpion and Five Poisons Divine Sect looked at each other from afar. Madame Scorpion's yellow dress fluttered in the wind, while Five Poisons Divine Sect's black robe fluttered in the wind. They were like the two gods of this world. However, Madame Venerable Saint was standing next to Five Poisons Divine Sect. Her lips curled into a cold smile as she looked at Madame Scorpion with an extremely arrogant look. It was the attitude of a victor. At that moment, Sumo, who was watching the battle from behind, raised her brows. He finally understood why the Saint Madame had killed the 8th stage Venerable Realm Elder without any hesitation, and why she did not attack Madame Scorpion. It was not only because the Venerable Saint talked too much, but also because he wanted to force Five Poisons Divine Sect to attack. That was the best way to provoke Madame Scorpion. Women always knew how to make use of other women. Hee. Madame Scorpion raised her brows and said coldly, "Senior Green Snake, you are still the same." Who, after saying that, Madame Scorpion did not say anything else and raised her hands. The lotus energy was like the wind, whistling as it rose. In an instant, tens of thousands of spiritual scorpions appeared behind her. They were so dense that they blotted out the sky and covered the earth like locusts. With an endless sound of breaking through the air, they swept towards Venerable Five Poisons and Madame Venerable Holy like a storm. This was an indiscriminate spell technique, and everything within a radius of several dozen kilometers was enveloped by it. If a mortal saw such a scene, they would probably be scared to death. Who had ever seen a scorpion flying in the sky? At that moment, Venerable Five Poisons did not say anything. Instead, he spread his arms wide. His movements were almost exactly the same as Madame Scorpion. That was because they were disciples of the same master. He knew this Tao technique as well, but what flew out from his back were green snakes. Chi. The green snakes were like tens of thousands of arrows, each with a long tongue sticking out. It was an extremely spectacular scene, and also an extremely frightening one. Many of the Five Poisons elders present had not seen a venerable sage in action for a long time. A poisonous scorpion against a poisonous snake. Every scorpion and snake was attached to the lotus power. Boom, boom in the sky, fireworks suddenly exploded. It was incomparably dazzling. At that moment, the originally dim sky of the Five Poisons world suddenly lit up. However, those were the fireworks of death. Countless poisonous scorpions and green snakes collided and exploded. A lifetime of slaughter, a death of a firework. The poisonous scorpions and green snakes were like Madame Scorpion and Venerable Five Poisons avatars, biting and clashing. When the poisonous scorpions and green snakes collided, neither of them made a move. Madame Scorpion watched all of this. Her eyes reflected the endless fireworks. She had seen this scene before, in the past. However, what they used back then were all illusions. Childhood sweethearts, the past was like smoke. Now it was a battle of life and death. Venerable Five Poisons' expression was cold. There was no sadness or joy in his eyes. His eyes seemed to represent nothing, but at the same time, it seemed to represent everything. Chi-chi, chi-chi, in the air, the poisonous scorpions and green snakes were almost completely exhausted. Madame Scorpion and Venerable Five Poisons faced each other, but they seemed to be separated by a world. As the poisonous scorpions and green snakes disappeared, the back of Madame Scorpion and Venerable Five Poisons rose to the sky. The light was so bright that it seemed like the sky behind them was hanging down from the sky. The Five Poisons' elders' eyes were tightly locked. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Xin Ming's expressions were also solemn. In this battle, the two's realm and aura were equally matched. It seemed like it would be difficult to determine the winner. Love and hate, life and death. Madame Scorpion's gaze gradually became cold. Looking again, she stretched her hand to her back and slowly pulled out a long black whip from her back. That long whip seemed to have been hidden in her body. It was a long whip that looked like a scorpion's tail. It emitted a faint black light, and within the black light there was a faint blue light. It was a lianbois, blue scorpion god's whip. The elders of the Five Poison holy sect couldn't help exchanging glances with each other, their expressions instantly changing. There were only two lianbois in the entire Five Poisons sect. The blue scorpion god's whip was one of them. Legend had it that it was formed from the body of the first dark scorpion emissary who sacrificed himself. However, this whip had been lost for millions of years, and no one knew where it went. That year, even in the last Holiness War, this lianbois did not appear. Who would have thought that it would be in Madame Scorpion's hands? Green Snake, what is going on? Madame Saint narrowed her eyes and looked at Five Poisons Saint coldly. Why is this lianbois in her hands? You ask me, but who should I ask? Five Poisons Saint's tone was calm. You? The black lotus on Madame Saint's forehead suddenly lit up, but it disappeared in a flash. Then, the corner of her mouth curled up and she sneered. Green Snake, no matter what, I will kill her today. You have one more chance. Five Poisons Saint ignored her, and looked at Madame Scorpion, and said in a deep voice, Zihua, leave now, and I will spare your life. This was the third time Five Poisons Saint said this. However, when Madame Scorpion heard this, she shook her head and sneered. The blue scorpion god's whip in her hand danced above her head. At this moment, half of the blue scorpion god's whip was black, and the other half was blue. Her lotus power had already been poured into it. At this moment, one whip from her could destroy a world. Senior brother, everything is impossible. Madame Scorpion looked at Five Poisons Saint, and her eyes had a trace of gentleness that could not be erased. Today, there will be no other result. Either you die or I die. Everything had been confirmed from the very beginning. It will not change. Ha ha ha. Hearing this, Madame Reverend Sage could not help but raise her head and laugh. Green Snake, your 3 chances are gone. She did not leave. Today, in the name of the Black Lotus, I will let you quell this chaos. Wherever the Black Lotus is, those who do not submit will be killed. Otherworldly beings annihilated. Five Poisons Saint did not speak, but his eyes suddenly lit up, and then were swallowed by the darkness. Whoosh, whoosh, looking again, black waves suddenly surged under Five Poisons Saint's feet. The waves spread out like clouds devouring the sky. In an instant the weather changed and the world changed. A black lotus appeared under Five Poisons Saint's feet. At the same time, a black lotus appeared under Madame Saint's feet. 2 lotuses were born simultaneously. Sumo's eyes focused. Then, his green robe gradually turned white. Chapter 990. When the black lotuses appeared, heaven and earth changed color. At that moment, if a cultivator looked at the Five Poisons star from all over the universe, they would see 2 black clouds rising from the 2 poles of the Five Poisons star. From the north and south, they rapidly spread towards the center of the Five Poisons star. At this moment, the center of the Five Poisons star was the 2 black lotuses. The entire 5-poison star was turning black. 2 saints in 1 star. It was a rare sight, but it happened on the 5-poison star. Now, the leader of the 5-poison star was not 5-poison sage alone, but 2. 2 black lotuses were born from the same stem. Endless black light flowed between the 2 black lotuses. At this moment, Madame Scorpion's eyes were slightly red, because the one born from the same stem as the green snake should have been her. But at this moment she did not want to say anything. She had no more tears because her tears were all gone. She had no more hatred, because hatred could not represent the pain in her heart. Crackle, crackle, the blue scorpion god's whip floated above his head like a wave. Countless blue arcs of lightning exploded in the black light, like stars in the night sky. At the same time, a white lotus appeared under her feet. It was a lotus that belonged to her. The white and black lotuses appeared at the same time. But this time, she was fighting 1 against 2. Green snake, make your move. What are you waiting for? The black lotus mark between Madame Venerable Saint's eyebrows suddenly lit up, like a jumping black flame. Whoosh, just as she finished speaking, 5-poison sage had already flown up. He was like a black eagle that had hibernated for a long time, finally swooping down. The black lotuses swayed, endless lotus power filled the air. The elders of the 5-poison sect retreated again. Forbidden light appeared under Wang Yu and Shen Ming's feet. Sumo's clothes had already turned completely white. The aura on his body was rising. At this moment, 5-poison sage had already formed a seal. He formed a seal with both hands, and a black hole suddenly appeared in the air. Inside the black hole, a pitch-black giant python with golden patterns appeared. The python was several hundred zhang long, and its waist was several zhang long. The huge creature opened its eyes, spitting out its long tongue as it headed straight for Madame Scorpion. Heaven-devouring divine python. That was Venerable 5-poison's spiritual divine beast. This beast normally hibernated in the dark spring of the 5-poison's sacred hall and did not appear in the world at all. It could absorb the power of the entire 5-poison star. The last time it appeared was during the battle for supremacy. At that time, the 5-poison saint commanded the sky-devouring divine python to directly devour 3 5-poison's saint sect elders. The sky-devouring divine python became famous in one battle. From then on, Elder 5-poison's expression changed at the mention of the sky-devouring divine python. It was known as the number 1 divine beast in the 5-poison's realm. Its battle prowess was not something the dark spirit Scorpion King could compare to. Ordinary 9th stage Venerable Realm cultivators were no match for it. The fact that 5-poison's saint had summoned the sky-devouring divine python was enough to show that he was serious. After all, it was one of the 5-poison's saint's most important fighting technique. Ha ha ha! The Saint Madame watched from the side and couldn't help but smile. At that moment, she was very satisfied with Venerable 5-poison's performance. The heaven-devouring divine python could really devour the heavens. At this moment, it opened its huge mouth, and an endless suction force lifted up endless sand and stones, like a flood. At that moment, it opened its giant mouth, and a boundless suction force swept up endless sand and pebbles. Venerable 5-poisons stood on top of the giant python and looked at Madame Scorpion coldly. At this moment, she finally found the calmest state of mind, the state of mind for battle. At that moment, she finally found the calmest state of mind, the state of mind to fight. Python, long time no see. Madame Scorpion smiled calmly. This sky-devouring divine python had been subdued by Green Snake since it was young. In other words, Green Snake and Zihua's growth was accompanied by the sky-devouring divine python's growth. They were all playmates. At that moment, the sky-devouring divine python's eyes were like stars, emitting a cold glint. However, when it saw that it was Madame Scorpion, it was startled. This was because the female cultivator in front of it was half its master. What's going on? This is not a game, This is a battle of life and death. Heartless humans, but sentimental beasts. The sky-devouring divine python was initially charging at Madame Scorpion. However, when it got close to Madame Scorpion, it suddenly raised its head and leaped into the sky, directly passing by her. For the first time, it instinctively did not attack Madame Scorpion. Because in its opinion, its master must have made a mistake. Why would its master kill her? Hee. Madame Scorpion shook her head and smiled bitterly. Sometimes, humans are really inferior to beasts. Actually, Madame Scorpion knew that the sky-devouring divine python would attack her soon. After all, the sky-devouring divine python's true master was 5 Poison Saint. And the sky-devouring divine python had a blood sacrifice contract with 5 Poison Saint. It had to obey the summons and orders of its master. However, this was enough. Madame Scorpion looked at the sky-devouring divine python and smiled lightly. Python, thank you. However, I will still kill you in a while. Because we will all die. In 3 days we will meet again. Whoosh, whoosh. Just as Madame Scorpion finished speaking, the sky-devouring divine python had already turned around. It stirred up an even bigger storm. 5 Poison Saint pressed his hand on its head and gave it the most direct order. Kill. The sky-devouring divine python was a beast after all. Could not fully understand the complex emotions of humans. It could only carry out orders. From a certain point of view, it was a puppet. Therefore, this time, it opened its huge mouth and its teeth were like swords, biting towards Madame Scorpion. Madame Scorpion's eyes flashed with sorrow. Because she was inferior to a beast. Previously, the sky-devouring divine python did not attack her, so she could only choose to kill it. Otherwise, it would become an obstacle for her to kill 5 Poison Saint. Humans were often crueler than beasts. Crackle, boom, lightning flashed and thunder roared. The blue scorpion divine whip suddenly curled in the air, like a black and blue lightning. It rolled unceasingly. It was truly a power that could destroy heaven and earth. At this moment, the entire 5 Poison planet lit up with countless lightning bolts. This planet was heading towards an endless calamity. Everyone understood that a Lotus warrior with Lienbois was enough to destroy the entire 5 Poison planet. However, this time, Madame Scorpion only wanted to kill the sky-devouring divine python. As the sky-devouring divine python attacked, Madame Scorpion's body suddenly fell down. At the same time, she flicked her wrist. The blue scorpion divine whip slightly raised. The head of the blue scorpion divine whip was originally a stinger, but now it was like a sharp sword. Pow, chi! The stinger directly pierced through the sky-devouring divine python's lower jaw. The blue scorpion divine whip was poisonous, but that poison was ineffective against the sky-devouring divine python. However, it was extremely sharp. Looking again, Madame Scorpion's face turned cold. The long whip in her hand instantly straightened. Then, she directly flew past the sky-devouring divine python in the opposite direction. Hua, the air was filled with arcs of lightning. A bolt of lightning like a swimming dragon streaked across the sky. That scene was extremely beautiful. Alas, the sky-devouring divine python's stomach was directly split open. That sky-devouring divine python was a divine beast that had cultivated for millions of years. There was no howl, only endless divine light spread out. At the same time, the countless divine lights instantly turned into sparkling stars. Sparkling and translucent, endlessly resplendent. That was the end of a powerful life form. The elders of the 5 Poison Saint clan all paled. That was the power of a Lotus warrior. The sky-devouring divine python was comparable to a 9th-level venerable, but in just one round, it was slaughtered by Madame Scorpion. Clean and efficient as if it was light. If they went over, it would be suicide. And the death of the sky-devouring divine python made Madame Scorpion's heart even colder. In the past, everything could be killed. Chapter 991. Perhaps everyone had killing intent in their heart, but they hid it normally. When you personally destroyed something that you once cherished, this killing intent would be triggered. Nothing else mattered. Thus, after personally killing the heaven-devouring god Python, Madame Scorpion's brows slightly narrowed. Whether it was her eyes or her heart, they were filled with killing intent. In the void, Madame Scorpion suddenly turned around. The blue scorpion divine whip in her hand suddenly shook, becoming as straight as a spear. Chi, the sound of the air being pierced rang out. Endless blue light appeared in front of the divine whip, piercing towards 5 poisons. Madame Scorpion's move was as fast as lightning. At that moment, all sorts of past events surfaced in her mind. She remembered the endless torture that 5 poisons had inflicted on her, the dark days on the immortal Scorpion star. She crawled in the black pond, living day and night with the poisonous scorpions and stench. She desired revenge so much that it was the only meaning of her life. Actually, she had asked countless times, why did senior brother treat her like that? Why did he torture her like that? Why did their love vanish into thin air without a trace? However, all those questions had been erased by time. It was not relief, but numbness. Some questions no longer needed an answer. At that moment, hatred and anger overflowed. It was the accumulation of millions of years. The white lotus under Madame Scorpion's feet started to spin, rays of white light forming a gust of wind. It was the majestic power of the lotus. Whoosh! Following the blue scorpion divine whip, Madame Scorpion's entire body charged towards 5 poisons like a falling star. The heaven-devouring god Python's starlight dissipated. Venerable 5 poisons' expression did not change much. His face was still devoid of joy or sadness. Actually, it was hard to tell if he was emotionless or heartless. No one had ever seen through his heart. As the blue scorpion divine whip attacked, 5 poisons did not dodge. Instead, he separated his hands. Whoosh, whoosh, his long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Looking again, his hands formed a technique. In front of him, a strange space-time crack suddenly appeared. There seemed to be a white figure inside the crack. However, a faint yellow light shot out from the space-time crack. It was an extremely ancient power that spread out from the space-time crack. That aura did not seem to belong to the 5 poisons world. It made everyone raise their eyebrows. 5 poisons divine steel? At this moment, some of the spectating 5 poisons elders cried out in surprise. As for the others, their faces were pale. Because some of them had participated in the Holiness War back then. That was the darkest period of the 5 poison world. At that time, the 5 poisons planet was almost destroyed. None of them wanted to go back to the past. The 5 poisons divine steel was a treasure that could only be used by venerable 5 poisons. It was also one of the 2 Lianbua items from the 5 poisons realm. However, its fame far surpassed that of the blue scorpion god's whip. The appearance of the divine steel could suppress the 5 poisons. Back then, during the Sage Seizing War, if not for Green Snake, Madame Scorpion, and the others' continuous battles, which resulted in the exhaustion of the venerable sage's power and the inability to control the 5 poisons divine steel, Green Snake would not have been able to obtain the venerable sage's position. Who, when he looked again, venerable 5 poisons parted his hand. A yellowish-brown stone tablet slowly emerged from the spacetime rift. Its speed of extraction was very slow. It was like a single seedling breaking out of the soil. However, at that moment, the time and space around it seemed to slow down. Madame Scorpion's blue god's whip rapidly approached. However, when it was a few hundred feet away from venerable 5 poisons, it suddenly slowed down. Even Madame Scorpion's speed slowed down. Everything seemed to be in slow motion. It was an extremely special stone tablet. It was nearly 3 feet tall and was yellowish-brown in color. Its surface was full of potholes and was covered with the marks of time. It did not look like a Lianbua item at all. Instead, it looked more like a piece of useless rock. On the front of the stone tablet there was only a simple pattern. The pattern was made up of concentric circles. At the center of the circle was an ordinary white dot. It looked very ordinary. On the back of the stone tablet there were pictures of the 5 poisons: scorpion, poisonous snake, centipede, toad, gecko. They formed a circle. In the middle of the circle there was a strange seal. Sumo frowned when she saw the stone tablet. She seemed to have seen that seal somewhere before. However, it was obvious that the 5 poisons pattern was imprinted with a spell. There was definitely no 5 poisons pattern on that stone tablet. This stone tablet was very special. At this moment it was completely pulled out of the spacetime crack. Then, the spacetime crack disappeared. At the same time, everything in the surroundings returned to normal. At this moment, Sumo acutely sensed that the slow spacetime just now was not because of the stone tablet, but because of the world behind it. Where did this reputation come from? Boom, crack. However, Sumo did not have time to think about it. In an instant, the blue scorpion divine whip pierced the 5 poisons divine tablet. The 5 poisons divine tablet shook violently, while the blue scorpion divine whip was sent flying. Blue light and yellow light exploded. The entire sky shook. The 2 Lianbua items clashed. The power was unimaginable. The 1,000-mile battlefield just now was no longer enough. In an instant, thousands of miles of dust flew. On the 5 poisons star, the mountains crumbled and the people were plunged into misery. From this moment on, the 5 poisons star headed towards destruction. Mushroom-like clouds rose from the void, rolling up layer by layer, covering the entire sky. Between the layers of spiritual clouds, Madame Scorpion turned into a yellow rainbow and directly rushed out. She did not stop. Instead, she and her lotus clashed against the 5 poisons divine sage. That was simply a suicidal strategy. At this moment, the 5 poisons divine sage's eyes were pitch black. The black lotus under his feet swayed continuously. Layers of black gas had already protected the 5 poisons divine sage. The 5 poisons divine tablet was right in front of him. He was confident that Madame Scorpion would not be able to break this Lianbua. However, Madame Scorpion did not slow down. Everyone was stunned by this scene. Madame Scorpion was committing suicide. But then, a miraculous scene appeared. Just when everyone thought that Madame Scorpion would ruthlessly crash into the 5 poisons divine tablet. Whoosh! Madame Scorpion suddenly disappeared. Everyone was stunned. The 5 poisons divine sage's eyes also slightly moved. Cloud-piercing technique. That was the most ancient technique in the 5 poisons realm. Even the elders present did not know about it. It was a technique that allowed one to instantly travel through time. In the past millions of years, there were only 3 cultivators from the 5 poisons realm who could successfully learn that technique. That was because it required millions of years of bitter meditation. Madame Scorpion succeeded. Madame Scorpion's figure went through the 5 poisons divine tablet, or rather, she changed the time and space around the 5 poisons divine tablet. Crackle, the blue divine whip danced once again. It carried the power of wind and thunder, or rather, it swept up the wind and thunder. At that moment, the 5 poisons divine sage could not escape. The distance was too close. The 5 poisons divine sage's lips curled into an indescribable smile. He opened his hands, as if preparing for his last resistance. Endless black light surged from his body. Boom! The blue scorpion divine whip had arrived. However, at that moment, Madame Scorpion's eyes suddenly flashed with a horrifying expression. Because there was no power coming from the 5 poisons divine sage. It was a hug. The green snake, Madame Scorpion suddenly shouted. She leaped up and went straight for Madame Scorpion. At the same time, Sumo flew up and the lotus vine in her hand swept toward Madame Scorpion. Chapter 992. Madame Venerable Saint was at the peak of the 9th layer Venerable Realm. She absolutely did not expect Venerable Five Poisons to not resist at the last moment. The black lotus between Madame Venerable Sage's eyebrows had completely bloomed. That was the black lotus origin energy. Above her head, there was an extremely strange black lotus. That black lotus could have controlled Venerable Five Poisons. However, she could not sense the existence of the black lotus in Five Poisons' supremacy's body. She had no idea what was wrong there. At the most crucial moment, Venerable Five Poisons actually lost control. However, she wanted to kill Madame Scorpion. That way, he might be able to save Venerable Five Poisons. The scene in front of them was something that none of the cultivators present could understand. Because they were not among them. The elders of the Five Poisons sacred sect didn't know what was going on. They could not sense that Venerable Five Poisons Sage had given up resisting, so they thought that it was still a showdown. Madame Scorpion did not expect this either. However, at this moment, she could no longer withdraw her attack. However, she saw a long-lost smile appear on the face of the Five Poisons Saint, who had always been cold and numb. His smile was as warm as it was yesterday. In that instant, it was enough to melt 1,000,000 years old profound ice. "Senior Marshal Brother," Madame Scorpion shouted in her mind. But she couldn't make a sound at all. Because everything was like a fishbone stuck in his throat. The blue scorpion god whip in her hand could no longer be withdrawn. Her body charged straight toward Venerable Five Poisons. Everything could not be redeemed. "Zihua, may you live forever." Five Poison Saint's body did not emit any power of harm, but a voice rang in Madame Scorpion's ears. It was a voice that only she could hear. "Zihua, may you live forever." Boom, crack. Madame Scorpion crashed into Five Poisons' Venerable Sage's embrace, and then she felt herself being hugged tightly by him. At that moment, everyone saw Venerable Five Poisons emit a dazzling brilliance. The Five Poisons' godly steel floated above his head. Hua, the Five Poisons' divine steel suddenly emitted a white light. The aura that caused time and space to freeze appeared once again. Both Madame Reverend Sage and Sumo were temporarily trapped in the void. That kind of calmness was something they could hardly feel. At the same time, a strange rune appeared behind Five Poisons Saint. It reincarnated and was actually a ray of light. The black robe on Five Poisons' Venerable Sage's body suddenly changed color. A green light suddenly appeared and plated the black robe. That was the original color of the green snake. He was handsome and dashing in the wind. It was the green snake from before. It was a pity that Madame Scorpion couldn't see it, because he was tightly held by the green snake's power. At that moment, Madame Scorpion's body and mind felt empty. Actually, she really wanted to break free, but she couldn't. Green Snake's smiling face and the way he called out to Zihua still appeared in her mind. What was all this for? She was bewildered and hopeless. However, this kind of despair was different from before. Wang Yu was right. In fact, deep in Madame Scorpion's heart, she did not know that she still loved her senior brother. Her existence revolved around the green snake. Be it life or death, be it love or hate, there was only the green snake in her world. Her revenge was more like an obsession. If the green snake died, she would not be able to live. Madame Scorpion only had 3 days to live, which was why she was so determined to charge at the green snake. She could die together with the green snake. However, she did not expect what was happening in front of her. Everything in the past had collapsed in an instant. At this moment, it was like the time when the green snake hugged Zihua passionately. Life or death. Rotation. Madame Reverend Saint was only 10 zhang away from Madame Scorpion, but she could not stop Madame Scorpion. She could only watch helplessly. She heard the last cry of the green snake with her own ears. Life or death. Rotation. What was that? That was a technique that she had never heard of before. Not only her, but all the cultivators present had never heard of that technique before. Because that was a technique that the green snake had cultivated for millions of years. It was all for this moment. Only at this moment could he break free from the Black Lotus and save Madame Scorpion. His millions of years of cultivation were all for this final moment. Life or death. Rotation. Looking again, the light on the green snake's body suddenly poured into Madame Scorpion's body. The green snake's body suddenly started to change. His green robe fell like a butterfly. That was like a rapidly withering flower. His physical body suddenly dried up like rice that had been burned by a fire. Then, his body was covered in black scales. His long hair instantly turned white. Countless crisscrossing scars appeared on his face. Sumo, Wang Yu, and the rest had seen this kind of injury before. Because that was the injury on Madame Scorpion's face. Everything that Madame Scorpion had in the past was transferred to the green snake's body. That scene caused Wang Yu and Shen Ming to be dumbfounded. That was a technique that was even more advanced than the death substitution technique. Because it was changing a kind of fate. The green snake's body started to burn. This kind of fire, Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming had all seen it before. It was the power of the 9 lives rejuvenation pill. Half of the green snake's body was turning into pus and then dissipating with the wind. Green snake, Madame Reverend Saint shouted. But the green snake had completely broken free from her Black Lotus power, or rather, the green snake had already started to die. Senior brother! Senior brother! Madame Scorpion was also shouting, but she was shouting in her heart, because her entire body was being enveloped by a great force. Lotus power poured in. Madame Scorpion's yellow robe was glowing with green light. The green light poured into Madame Scorpion's body and into her Dan Si. Madame Scorpion originally did not have a Dan Si. Because, in essence, the 9 lives rejuvenation pill was a type of poison. Basically, Madame Scorpion was not a true Lotus Knight, but a Lotus Knight with the power of 3 days. She could turn into a lotus externally, but her Dan Si was empty. However, as the green snake's lotus power poured in, the image of a green lotus appeared in her Dan Si. A lotus seed was planted in her Dan Si. At that moment, Madame Scorpion became a true Lotus Knight, and streams of scarlet air were forced out of her body. That was the pill poison of the 9 lives rejuvenation pill. In other words, the green snake's final technique changed Madame Scorpion's fate. She no longer needed to die. Boom! The last half of the green snake's body started to dissipate and suddenly exploded at the last moment. Madame Scorpion's body shook. That tight binding feeling finally disappeared completely. But she did not move. At that moment, Madame Scorpion seemed to have lost her soul, and she stood in the air, stupefied. Her eyes were empty and frightening, but the power of time and space on the 5 poisons divine steel had disappeared. Whoosh! Madame Venerable had already rushed to Madame Scorpion's side. The black lotus on her forehead suddenly turned into a black sword, and it pierced toward Madame Scorpion's back. If that sword hit, Madame Scorpion would die for sure. But Sumo's lotus vine had already arrived. Boom! Pa! The lotus vine directly hit the black sword. They were both at the peak of the venerable realm, but Sumo's Lianbo was a top-grade venerable. As a result, the black sword that had manifested was immediately dispersed. At the same time, Sumo turned her wrist. The lotus vine curled up and wrapped around Madame Venerable's waist. Sumo exerted force in her hand, and she forcefully pulled Madame Venerable's waist and threw her into the air. Crack! On the 5 poisons star, the darkness of the 2 poles was about to close. And Madame Venerable, who was in Sumo's hand, was thrown into the crack that was about to close. Boom! Crack! Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Madame Venerable's face was as pale as a sheet. But the black lotus on her forehead suddenly exploded. Chapter 993. The black lotuses exploded with immortal power. Just now, the darkness that was closing suddenly separated. At that moment, the entire 5 poisons planet trembled. The black lotuses above Madame Venerable's head contained lotus power. Now, it was like a fuse that ignited everything. Boom, boom, the entire sky of the 5 Poisons planet seemed to shatter. Black clouds exploded one after another. At that moment, Madame Venerable wanted to escape, but she was still entangled by the lotus vines. Earlier, Madame Venerable did not pay much attention to Sumo, because in her eyes, Sumo and the others were not worth mentioning. She thought that the cultivator from the other world could be destroyed easily. But she was wrong. She did not expect Sumo to have Lianhua, and a top-grade Lianhua at that. At that moment, she saw Sumo's white robe and Sumo's beautiful face. There was such a beautiful man in the infinite worlds? At that moment, Madame Venerable's heart skipped a beat. This was because she had always liked handsome men. But Sumo only gave her a chance to look at him. Sumo did not have a good impression of Madame Venerable. He said that Madame Venerable would regret it. In the void, thunder rumbled and black fog rolled. At that moment, everyone knew that the entire 5 Poisons planet was being destroyed. The elders of the 5 Poisons divine sect looked on blankly. Even if the 5 Poisons planet was destroyed, they would be able to protect themselves. However, what should he do with the current situation? They did not have an answer. Destroy! At that moment, Sumo raised an eyebrow. When she looked again, the lotus vines suddenly emitted an endless green light. Even on the 5 Poisons star, the green light was shining with an incomparably resplendent light. Boom! A loud explosion. The lotus vines suddenly tightened and forcefully crushed Madame Venerable's body. The black fog exploded, causing everyone's heart to tremble. The elders of the 5 Poisons divine sect were shocked. They did not understand Madame Venerable's death. Just now, when Madame Reverend Xing was swept up by Sumo's lotus vines, their feelings were very complicated. Should they save him or not? Should they escape or not? However, Sumo didn't let them struggle for too long. In the blink of an eye, the Saint Madame's physical body was destroyed. The flesh of the 9th layer Martial Highness realm was even stronger than the 5 Poisons star. However, under Sumo's lotus vines they were like chicken eggs. The physical body dissipated, but the divine soul still existed for a moment. That moment seemed very long to Madame Venerable Saint. In fact, even Madame Reverend Saint herself did not expect that she would die in the hands of this alien cultivator. She knew that she was about to fall. Could that cultivator from the other world be a Lotus Knight? At that moment, Madame Reverend Saint was a little dazed. She remembered seeing a peerlessly beautiful face just now. That face seemed to resemble that of a green snake. Green snake? Madame Xuanxing smiled bitterly in her heart. Because she had always thought that she could completely control the green snake. Whether green snake was willing or not, he must listen to her orders. Over 1,000,000 years, that was indeed the case. Even if green snake was unwilling, he had never disobeyed her. She was the absolute queen of the 5 Poisons realm. Her real name was Black White, and her true identity was a Black Lotus Knight. After Green Snake and the Black Lotus made a contract, everything in the 5 Poisons realm was under her control. She could control the Black Lotus inside Green Snake's body. In this sense, the Green Snake was her puppet. However, she fell in love with Green Snake. She liked Green Snake's handsome face, liked his temperament. However, she also knew that the most important woman in Green Snake's heart was Madame Scorpion. Therefore, she thought of all ways to torture Madame Scorpion. She wanted to possess and control him. She was once very satisfied with Green Snake's performance. Therefore, she listened to Green Snake's suggestion and did not kill Madame Scorpion, but left her a way out. Now, she understood that this way out was Green Snake's way out. He used over 1,000,000 years of humiliation in exchange for his final freedom. In other words, he wanted Madame Scorpion's freedom. Green Snake succeeded. His last technique completely broke free of the Black Lotus control. Over 1,000,000 years ago, when Green Snake accepted Black Lotus' gift and made a contract with him, he never would have thought that his choice would not only cause him to lose himself, his true love, it would cause the entire Five Poisons realm to sink into endless darkness. Life and death cycle. To Green Snake, that was a kind of redemption. Day and night they had been together, but 1,000,000 years later, it was all for nothing. The moment Green Snake died, Madame Saint understood that Five Poisons realm, the Black Lotus Dark World, would become an abandoned pawn. Because Black Lotus did not need a powerful world. Black Lotus' final goal was for these worlds to be purified. Once Green Snake died, she, Black-White, had no value. She would not obtain anything. A dream, a tear, an emptiness. Boom! Black-White, intuitively, saw endless light appear in front of her. The light was so blinding, she had never seen such a world. Death was so beautiful. Boom! Then, she lost all her senses. At this time, from the perspective of the people on Five Poisons Star, Sumo's lotus vines had completely scattered Madame Saint's soul. Her soul was gone. Madame Saint had also died. In an instant, the dragons were leaderless. The venerable elders looked at each other. If they went against Sumo, they would only die. Plus, whether it was Five Poisons' venerable saint or Madame Saint, they had never been kind to them. So, at this time, they definitely would not fight to the death. Madame Scorpion. Madame. The cultivators looked at each other, then knelt down in front of Madame Scorpion together. From their perspective, the one most capable of leading the Five Poisons divine sect at this time was Madame Scorpion. With Madame Scorpion's prestige, she only needed to make one move. Then, even if Five Poisons Star was destroyed, with the other 5 stars, she could ensure the survival of the Five Poisons divine sect. At this time, thunder rumbled. The void of Five Poisons Star was exploding continuously. A portion of the Five Poisons divine sect cultivators still did not understand what was happening on this star. However, the core of Five Poisons Star had not exploded yet. The most powerful storm had yet to come. At this time, the venerable elders were hoping that Madame Scorpion could turn the tide and save everything. Madame Scorpion! Madame Scorpion! Their first 2 shouts were ignored by Madame Scorpion. So, they anxiously shouted again. Madame Scorpion stood in the void in a daze, but her lotus chi was enough to protect herself. All the forces automatically avoided Madame Scorpion. Hee hee. Madame Scorpion finally made a sound, but it was an extremely sad and strange laughter. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shin Ming heard it, and it sounded like she was laughing before she took the 9 Deaths rejuvenation pill. Madame Scorpion, you're awake? One of the elders asked worriedly. Hee hee. Madame Scorpion smiled at that elder, but her expression suddenly turned cold. Then, her long sleeves suddenly waved. Hugh, the wind picked up. Before the elder who just spoke understood what was happening, he was directly hit into the void by Madame Scorpion. With a boom, his soul was destroyed. Hua! All the venerable elders' expressions changed. Can any of you tell me why? Madame Scorpion's eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. She crazily screamed, Why? Why? But she would never get the answer. Things in the infinite worlds were often like this. At this moment, Madame Scorpion started a massacre. Blood filled the sky. Chapter 994. His yellow robes fluttered in the wind like a mad demon. Madame Scorpion did not stop after killing the 5 Poisons Elder. Instead, her killing intent soared to the sky. At that moment, she was like a tiger that had entered a flock of sheep, like a god of slaughter that had descended. A total of 17 elders of the 5 Poisons Saint Venerate had appeared today. Yi Fu had already been killed by Wu Bai. The remaining 16 did not escape Madame Scorpion's grasp, because none of them could answer Madame Scorpion's question. Among them, there were some who wanted to escape, but in front of the Lotus Warriors, They simply did not have the ability to escape. Madame Scorpion killed one person with each move. In her opinion, the remaining 5 Poison's elders all deserved to die. They were helping the evildoer. Other than Yi Fu, who had died first, they could all be killed. Madame Scorpion did not hold back at all. The last 3 venerable realm experts were smashed to pieces by her whip, and their souls dissipated. Ha ha ha, he. Madame Scorpion held the blue scorpion divine whip in her hand and laughed towards the sky. However, as she laughed, she began to cry. Originally, Madame Scorpion had no more tears, but now, her tears flowed like a fountain. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shin Ming did not stop her. Killing might allow her to vent, crying might calm her down. Sumo and the others didn't know the specifics, but they could roughly guess what was going on. The 5 Poisons star continued to be destroyed. The 5 sectors of 5 Poisons star had already begun to collapse. The buildings at the headquarters of the 5 Poisons sacred sect had all collapsed. The black clouds above the north and south poles had all exploded. At this time, from vast universe's perspective, the 5 Poison star was a star that was on the verge of exploding. This dark star was being destroyed. Lady Scorpion, my condolences. After a while, Sumo slowly said. At this time, Wang Yu and Shin Ming also revealed their true faces. Madame Scorpion's screams gradually stopped. At this moment, she had calmed down a little. She was trying her best to control her emotions. She saw the 5 Poison star being destroyed bit by bit, but there was no pity in her eyes. Originally, Madame Scorpion loved Planet 5 Poison. After all, it was her home planet. In fact, with Madame Scorpion's current strength, she could totally turn the tables. A true Lotus Knight could create his own world. The star core of the 5 Venom star had not exploded yet. Naturally, there was still a way to save it. However, Madame Scorpion wasn't going to do that. She stopped crying and killing, but it didn't mean that the sorrow and despair in her heart were no longer pervasive. On the contrary, those things had completely occupied her heart. Madame Scorpion waved her hand. Hua, as she waved her hand, the power of the entire 5 Poisons star was swept away. They were like the waves of the sea, carrying with them rolling thunder and lightning, spreading to both sides. In the sky above the 5 Poisons star, an incomparably bright zone appeared. At that moment, the surviving 5 Poisons planet cultivators couldn't help but look up at the sky. They saw the power of light, the hope of life. Madame Scorpion had the power to destroy heaven and earth, but she also had the power to rebuild everything. At this moment, the future of the 5 Poison world was in her hands. Senior Marshal Brother, you actually said that you would give me eternal life? Madame Scorpion laughed hysterically. At that moment, she seemed to see the appearance of a green snake in the light of the 5 Poisons star. Cute and hateful. You gave me your power, and then you want me to reconstruct the 5 Poison realm, right? Ha! Madame Scorpion looked at the light in the sky. Madame Scorpion was a peerless beauty. Her face still had crystal-clear tears. Her beauty was indescribable. At this moment, her eyes were clear and filled with despair. It was a kind of gaze that made people who saw it not know what to do. But, Senior Marshal Brother, if you are not here, what is the meaning of this world? Madame Scorpion smiled. Whether it is the immortal Scorpion or the 5 Poisons world, none of them will be my final destination. I am only a woman. The final destination that I yearn for should always be in your heart. So, I am sorry, Senior Marshal Brother. Madame Scorpion's tone gradually became calm. Because, the moment she knew that the green snake had died, she had already made a decision. Little brother, where are you from? Madame Scorpion suddenly turned to Sumo and said, I am the Demon King of the 3 Realms. Sumo said, I come from a world called the 3 Realms Galaxy, and Izong swallowed my home. And Madame Scorpion smiled and nodded, then said, Then, what is your name? Sumo. Sumo said, Good. Madame Scorpion nodded again, then she took a deep breath. Thank you for your pill, I am finally free. And everything that has happened now is far better than what I had imagined. That dark spirit Scorpion King is nothing. I will give these 2 lianbois to you." Saying that, Madame Scorpion waved her hand. The blue Scorpion God Whip and the 5 poisons God Steel were directly sent to Sumo. Madame Scorpion? Sumo wanted to say something, but Madame Scorpion shook her head. "Demon King, this is my choice. No matter right or wrong, I will not be a puppet, I will only listen to my heart's call. So, you do not need to say anything." Sumo let out a long sigh, received the 2 treasures, and kept them in her cosmos bag. "It is fate that brought us together." Madame Scorpion smiled again. "I have one more thing for you, that way you can control the 5 poisons God Steel. The 3 of you take care." Hua, after saying that, Madame Scorpion formed a seal with her hands. The surging lotus power caused Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming to involuntarily retreat. Luckily, it was not a power that could harm them. At that moment, Madame Scorpion was the ruler. Looking again, Madame Scorpion's forehead suddenly emitted a ray of light. Then, a lotus flower flew out from between her brows. Green leaves, white lotus, incomparably bright. Lotus seed. And that lotus went straight for Sumo. Currently, Sumo seemed to be imprisoned in the void by Madame Scorpion. Boom! Sumo felt a green and white light flash in front of him, and his mind was buzzing. That lotus seed was actually directly passed to Sumo, and sank into her Dan Sea. In an instant it created 100,000 zhang wave. Madame Scorpion! Sumo never would have thought that Madame Scorpion would pass the lotus seed she just obtained to him. And at this moment, Madame Scorpion's hand seal was completed. Self-destruct. Boom, boom, on the 5 poisons star, endless mysterious light lit up. That mysterious light pierced through heaven and earth. From one ray to another, it covered the entire star. At that moment, the other 5 stars of the 5 poisons world could see that mysterious light through space and time. It was as if the entire universe was about to be ignited. Madame Scorpion chose the most decisive method. Not only did she self-destruct, she also took away the 5 poisons star, and even the entire 5 poisons world. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. 10,000 thoughts extinguished, 10,000 things turned into nothingness. Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming were enveloped by Madame Scorpion's power. It was as if they were inside a crystal ball, watching the 5 poisons star explode. That star was completely destroyed. Its power even rushed out of the dark world, and the other 5 stars also began to explode. This was a calamity in the universe. The 5 poisons world was completely destroyed. Dust billowed in the universe, and a new black hole was forming where the original 5 poisons world was. And at the edge of the darkness, a gray-clothed cultivator slowly walked towards Sumo's group. He had waited for a long time. Chapter 995. The destruction of a star or a small world wasn't anything at all to vast universe. After all, creation and destruction happened all the time. Even in the Glaze realm, the destruction of the 5 poisons star would not cause much of a stir. The so-called major events were usually targeted at the people involved. To those who were not involved, they did not matter. Just like how they would never mourn the fall of an unrelated star in the vast universe, because it was not the sun. The interstellar dust of the 5 poisons star realm was still spreading. It was a process that would take tens of thousands of years to spread like a rolling tide. There were probably only a handful of cultivators who would be able to escape from this calamity. The 5 poisons star was the center of this calamity. Hence, the area it was in was the first to calm down. The protection that Madame Scorpion had left on Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming also gradually faded. They had witnessed the destruction of too many worlds, and did not feel anything. However, they all felt sorry for Madame Scorpion. "Sister, if you were Madame Scorpion, what would you choose?" Shen Ming asked. The same as her. Wang Yu did not hesitate. Green Snake has been a puppet for millions of years. Actually, he wanted to give all the opportunities to Madame Scorpion. But Madame Scorpion only wants him. All of this is a contradiction. Because Green Snake's final Dao technique can break through everything. However, he will also fall. Madame Scorpion did the right thing. She will not be a puppet, and will only listen to the call of her heart. If it were me, I would also choose to bury the entire 5 poison star. But what about the 5 poisons? Shen Ming asked. Kiki. Wang Yu laughed coldly. Why do I have to hold the lives of all living beings in my heart? My heart is very small, and it has long been filled. I am not a true Blue Sea disciple. Don't you have my brother, the Demon King, and the others to do things for the common people? Shen Ming was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and said, Sister, what you said makes sense. In the future, I want to be like you. Unfortunately, you don't have a brother. Wang Yu rolled his eyes at Shen Ming. Shen Ming. At this time, Sumo did not interrupt. He looked at the distant starry sky with a solemn expression. This was because he saw a gray-clothed cultivator walking through the billowing dust. In theory, there were no longer any cultivators in the 5 poisons star boundary. They were either dead or had escaped. No cultivator was willing to stay in a destroyed world. They all had to protect themselves. However, that gray-clothed cultivator suddenly and calmly appeared in the 5 poisons world's billowing dust. This meant that the gray-robed cultivator had always been there. He had been on the 5 poison star before, but he had not shown himself. Lotus Warrior? Sumo's heart tightened. Other than the 5 poisons venerable sage, the 5 poisons realm also had Lotus Warriors? Before this, no one had discovered the existence of this cultivator. Wang Yu and Shen Ming stopped talking, because they also saw that gray-clothed cultivator. He was tall and thin, and his appearance was delicate. They had never seen the gray-clothed cultivator's appearance before. However, he had an aura that they felt was familiar. 100 feet away, the gray-clothed cultivator stopped. This distance was already an absolute attack range. Therefore, he did not move forward. Demon King, it's an honor to meet you. The gray-clothed cultivator looked at Sumo from afar. Who are you? Sumo asked. The second swordsman. The gray-clothed cultivator smiled faintly. You killed many of our swordsmen previously. The second swordsman? Sumo could not help but raise her eyebrows. Previously, he had been intercepted by 4 great swordsmen at the interstellar barrier, and in the end, he had self-destructed his demonic boat. If not for Ji Guang's rescue, he would have died. However, the 4 swordsmen last time were at the peak of the supremacy realm. This time, it was the Lotus realm. A hidden Lotus warrior had finally appeared. Sumo involuntarily took 2 steps forward in order to better block Wang Yu and Shen Ming. Both of them were not yet at the supremacy realm. As long as the swordsman had a second thought, they could be killed. The gray-clothed cultivator seemed to know what Sumo was thinking. Demon King, don't worry. I am only following orders to kill you. As long as the others do not make a move, I will not kill them. In a while, none of you are allowed to make a move. Otherwise, you will only cause trouble for me. Sumo said to Wang Yu and Shen Ming. Both of them nodded slowly. Facing a Lotus warrior was not the time to show off. Sumo, don't worry. However, Wang Yu added lightly, he will definitely not dare to touch me and Ming, because we are from Luo Fan Town. Sumo nodded. Demon King, I really did not expect that you could make my master issue a silver fish order to send me to kill you. Last time, I thought you had fallen. Oh? Sumo laughed. I really want to know, who is your master? Black Blind Warrior. The second swordsman did not hide it like the other swordsman, but directly answered Sumo's question. Black Blind Warrior? Sumo frowned. She had never heard of this name. Black Blind Warrior is a protector under Izong Dharmaraja. We are all his subordinates, so people call us Black Blind Swordsmen. The second swordsman said. Izong Dharmaraja? Sumo asked again. Then who is Izong Dharmaraja? Izong Dharmaraja is Izong Dharmaraja, the second swordsman said. However, if you ask for his title, it is Heartless. Heartless King is Izong Dharmaraja. Heartless King. This title, Sumo? This was the first time he heard of it. This was also the highest-ranked enemy he knew. One must know that Dharmaraja King was above Lotus Warrior. Moreover, there could only be one Dharmaraja in the entire Izong world. That was an existence that Sumo could not hope to reach at the moment. Izong Dharmaraja? Wang Yu and Shin Ming looked at each other. Because, in Luofan town, they heard that there was no Dharmaraja in the Izong world. Then, why does he want to kill me? Sumo laughed coldly. Presumably, the destruction of the Three Realms galaxy was related to him, right? He was not willing to see the growth of the galaxy Lotus Soul. When we kill, we don't ask why. Warrior, if you want me to kill, I will kill. The second swordsman laughed. However, I am willing to answer you. Actually, the worlds need to develop and evolve, and you have become an obstacle. The galaxy was originally a low-level world. It was natural for it to be devoured and destroyed. What a good natural! Sumo's face turned slightly cold. The reason why you are telling me so much is because you are confident that you can kill me, right? Yes. The second swordsman answered straightforwardly. You are different from the previous swordsman, Sumo said. Actually, before this, you had many opportunities to make a move. You could even join forces with the Holy Lady of the Five Poisons world. That way, your chances of winning would be higher. That's right. The second swordsman nodded. But, if that was the case, I would not be the second swordsman. I am a swordsman, but I am different from them. Every cultivator that I kill them head-on. I disdain sneak attacks. I do not need anyone's help. This is my way of being a swordsman. It seems that you have never failed before. Sumo laughed coldly. Of course. The second swordsman also laughed. I have killed at least 9 Lotus Warriors, and you are only at the peak of the 9th stage, Venerable. Even if you have the Lianbua to protect you, and have the ability to transcend levels, you are still not my opponent. Sumo nodded. In fact, he knew that what the second swordsman said was not wrong. However, he naturally would not sit and wait for death. Whoosh! Sumo's hand shook, and the lotus vine was already released. It was like a green dragon, directly binding the second swordsman. At the same time, the Kuan soul saber in Sumo's right hand also moved. This was, after all, a battle of life and death. Chapter 996. Whoosh! The lotus vine and the Kuan soul blade were both top-grade Lianbua. Suemo summoned them at the same time in order to gain the upper hand. Now, the entire Five Poisons realm had been destroyed. This place had become their interstellar battlefield. The lotus vine was like a dragon, and the Kuan soul split the sky. The two Lianbua stirred up waves in the Five Poisons realm that had yet to settle. Whoosh, whoosh! If the entire Five Poisons realm was a raging sea that had yet to subside, then Sumo's two Lianbua were the evil dragons that stirred up the sea again. Waves rose, and smoke rose from thousands of miles away. It was a power that would make most cultivators frown in shock. Wang Yu pulled Shin Ming and hurriedly retreated. The forbidden map appeared under their feet again. Otherwise, they would not be able to survive in the Five Poisons realm. It could be said that Sumo did not hold back when she attacked, because he knew that the second swordsman was a Lotus Knight, and would not give him any chance. The two Lianbua swept up the world. Sumo increased the power that he could mobilize to the extreme. His white robe was like a snowflake in space, but this snowflake brought with it the coldness of a blizzard. Ha ha! Facing such a situation, the second swordsman's expression was as usual, and he was not shocked at all. Because no matter how much Sumo improved himself, he was still at the peak of the venerable realm. He was not a Lotus Knight. Even with the Lianhua, he could not be compared to a real Lotus Knight. Below the Lotus Knight, Sumo was invincible. However, there was a world of difference between a Lotus Knight and a Venerable. Venerable and Lotus Knights were fundamentally different. Even a peak 9th tier Venerable could not be compared to an ordinary Lotus Knight, let alone the second swordsman, who was a killer among Lotus Knights. As he said, he had killed more than one Lotus Knight, let alone a Venerable like Sumo. He was not arrogant, but he had the confidence. Therefore, when Sumo's Lianhua was used, it was indeed shocking and shook the world. However, for the second swordsman it was nothing. He had seen such scenes too many times. He did not draw his sword at all. The second swordsman stood in the void, watching Sumo's two Lianhua attacks, but he separated his hands. The shadow of a lotus appeared in space. Boom, crack, Sumo's lotus vines and the Kuan's soul blade struck the lotus flower at almost the same time. In an instant, the storm of power swept everything. The lotus vines and the Kuan's soul saber were blasted away by the lotus flower. It wasn't that the lotus vine and the Kuan's soul blade weren't high enough, but rather that Sumo didn't have the lotus power to unleash their full power. Once again, Sumo was invincible below the lotus warrior level. Sumo could kill a 9th layer martial venerable with a single slash. However, in front of a true lotus warrior, he was not strong enough. Bang, however, the second swordsman's lotus shadow was also shattered by the lotus vines and the Kuan's soul saber. The second swordsman nodded slightly when he saw it. It seemed that sending other swordsmen to kill Sumo was a mistake. Unless it was a lotus warrior, a peak martial venerable would not be able to kill Sumo. Demon King, let's end this. The second swordsman advocated a head-on fight, but that didn't mean he would give Sumo a chance. On the contrary, his killer's instinct made him give it his all in every move. As soon as the lotus scattered, the second swordsman took advantage of the moment when Sumo's two Lianhua were blasted away to attack again. Sword light. The second swordsman didn't draw his sword, and Sumo didn't even see it. However, the second swordsman's body suddenly emitted endless sword energy. That was the strongest sword energy Sumo had ever seen. The second swordsman's swordsmanship had reached a level that Sumo couldn't understand. The endless light condensed into a single point. Chi Hua. Sumo felt as if a blazing sun suddenly appeared in the distance, and then a beam of divine light came straight at her. Within that divine light there was boundless might. This power was very similar to the binding power that burst out from Madame Scorpion's body. Realm suppression. That was the most common and effective attack between cultivators of different realms. Fortunately, Sumo still had Lianhua on her, otherwise Sumo wouldn't be able to withstand this realm suppression. The sword light came and Sumo felt endless pressure. Then, his mind moved. Boom, dang, hum, the second swordsman's eyebrows slightly twitched, because he saw an ancient bell suddenly appear above Sumo's head. And his sword light hit that ancient bell. Yin-Yang Bell, life and death. This time, the second swordsman used his own lotus power to ring the Yin-Yang Bell. In an instant, the entire Five Poisons world shook. It was almost a resonance. Hum, boom, the Yin-Yang Bell rang and all the world shook. In an instant, the Five Poisons world that had yet to dissipate was once again torn apart by the endless immortal power. It fell into the second wave of resonance destruction. With Sumo and the second swordsman as the center, a giant wave of 10,000 feet once again spread out. Wang Yu and Shen Ming took out the protective magic treasures in their hands at the same time. Those magic treasures were absolute venerable divine weapons. At the same time, with a thought, they directly went thousands of miles away, and the forbidden map under their feet suddenly lit up. Only then did they barely block the sound wave. Bang, bang, Even so, one of the protective magic treasures had already been directly broken. Wang Yu and Xin Ming couldn't help but change their expressions. It seemed that even if the second swordsman didn't intend to kill them, the aftermath of the Lotus Warrior's spell could be fatal. Fuse! Wang Yu said to Xin Ming. With that, the two of them made a hand seal at the same time. In an instant, the two sisters merged into one. In this way, they were in the Venerable Realm. With magic treasures and forbidden maps, they could still watch the battle from afar. At this time, the second swordsman suffered the biggest impact. The yin-yang bell was Sumo's magic treasure. Therefore, all the sound waves had no effect on Sumo. But the second swordsman was different. He bore the brunt of the sound waves. That was equivalent to a blow from a Lotus Warrior. Sword, come! The second swordsman waved his long sleeves and shouted. It turned out that he hadn't used his sword before. The so-called sword light was only formed by his lotus power. But now the yin-yang bell's attack was too fierce. He had to use his sword. Whoosh! Looking again, a space crack appeared in the void. In the crack, a white light suddenly appeared in front of the second swordsman, like a white dragon. That was a lianbua. As soon as it appeared, it directly split the air waves rushing toward the second swordsman. The yin-yang bell's attack disappeared in an instant. Whoosh! The second swordsman held a sword in his hand. Previously, he really didn't expect that Sumo could so easily force him to use a sword. It should be known that he hadn't used a sword for a long time. Because there was no need. Silver Moon! The second swordsman looked at the sword in his hand, and his eyes instantly had a trace of tenderness. This will be the last time you accompany me to kill people. Once the silver fish token is gone, you and I will live in seclusion in the Crescent Lake. From then on, we will no longer enter the Jianghu. The Black Blind Swordsman has promised me freedom. We can quietly wait for Yizong to be purified. Buzz! The Silver Moon Immortal Sword made a dragon roar, as if it understood the second swordsman's words. The second swordsman's mouth curved into a smile, but it immediately disappeared. Kill! After saying that, the second swordsman's eyes turned cold. His body burst out an unparalleled murderous aura. That kind of murderous aura couldn't be compared to all the previous black and white swordsmen combined. Among the black and white swordsmen, the gray robe was the second. However, the number of Lotus warriors he killed was the first, because the first swordsman had never made a move. He Li Mu was the terminator of Lotus warriors. He had never failed. Whoosh! The gray robe fluttered and the silver moon danced. A long silver rainbow appeared in the starry sky, heading straight for Sumo. Chapter 997. The silver moon was a curved longsword. It really looked like a crescent moon. The second swordsman's sword released a silver moonlight that pierced through the stars. That sword directly bypassed the yin-yang bell. In the moonlight, there was endless lotus power. That sword could definitely kill a Lotus warrior. At this time, Sumo's face was already slightly pale. It was indeed extremely difficult for him to fight against a Lotus warrior. This battle was Sumo's most difficult battle. With a thought, the Lotus Vine and the Kuan Soul Blade flew out at the same time. The Kuan Soul Blade went straight to the silver moon. The Lotus Vine instantly grew wildly. It directly formed a dense vine wall in front of Sumo. The vine wall was covered with blood-red roses. No cultivator in the Venerable Realm could have such a defense. At the same time, the yin-yang bell went straight to the head of the second swordsman. Defending while attacking, attacking while defending. It could be said that Sumo had reached the pinnacle of what he could do. At the same time, Sumo's figure quickly retreated. Countless runes had already appeared all over her body. Those runes began to rapidly deduce, and in an instant, they had already become a sea. Forbidden Painting. That was currently the most powerful spell that Sumo could cast. And other spells were almost meaningless in front of a Lotus warrior. Lianbua came out together, followed by spells. That scene made Wang Yu and Shen Ming in the distance gasp in amazement. In Wang Yu's heart, Xiao Luo was far inferior to her brother Amu. However, the scene at this moment made her feel that her brother was probably at this level back then. Of course, Sumo did not have the 9 coffins. At this time, the second swordsman also nodded secretly. Sumo's response had somewhat exceeded his imagination. However, that was far from enough. The second swordsman raised one hand. A vigorous lotus power directly blocked the yin-yang bell from the stars. The yin-yang bell kept spinning, but it could not set off sound waves. It was like the absolute power of a lotus warrior. At the same time, boom, crack. The moment the Kuan Soul Saber's blade light touched the Silver Moon Sword's sword light, it instantly dimmed. The Kuan Soul Saber was sent flying. Under Sumo's control, it still couldn't compete with Lotus Lianhua. However, the Silver Moon Sword ray also paused for a moment as a portion of its power was dissipated. Bang, the remaining sword gleams were blocked by the lotus vines. Looking again, the wall of lotuses and vines had been pushed out more than 1,000 feet. Wherever the sword light passed, all the blood roses were destroyed. The petals fell like rain, leaving a trail of red. At the center of the wall of lotus vines, there was a protrusion that was hundreds of feet wide. Fortunately, it managed to block the sword. However, Sumo's face had turned even paler. He cultivated the white bone unwithered art, but at this moment, he found it hard to sustain his immortal power. This was something that had never happened before. Hee. The second swordsman smirked. Demon King, you're not bad. However, this is far from enough. Kill. A cold light flashed in the eyes of the second swordsman. Unbeknownst to anyone, his second sword had already appeared. That sword did not go to the front of Sumo. Instead, it suddenly appeared behind Sumo. Everyone, whether it was Wang Yu, Shen Ming, or Sumo herself, did not understand. Why did another sword gleam appear behind Sumo? The Silver Moon Sword was clearly in front of Sumo. Moreover, the sword behind it was black. It was like a shadow of the Silver Moon Sword, but also like a ghost. Chi between the stars, the black electric arc was like a swimming snake. It went straight to the center of Sumo's back. This was the secret of the second swordsman. There were actually 2 Silver Moon Swords. One yin and one yang. Under normal circumstances, there were not many cultivators who could block his sword. If the first sword succeeded, there was no need for a second sword. But if the first sword missed, the second swordsman's yin sword would appear from the opposite direction, directly killing the opponent. And almost all the Lotus warriors who were slashed by the second swordsman died under his yin sword. Demon King, the combined bodies of Wang Yu and Shen Ming shouted. However, they did not have the ability to rescue Sumo. Puff, in the distance, they saw the black sword directly penetrate the center of Sumo's back. Boom, above the stars, colorful light scattered in all directions, like a gorgeous firework. The sea of forbidden maps under Sumo's feet actually shattered in an instant. The expressions of Wang Yu and Shen Ming suddenly changed. They moved and were about to rush up. However, at this time, the second swordsman suddenly raised his eyebrows, because he did not feel the aura of death. That sword just now seemed a little strange. He did not stab Sumo at all. And at this time, he suddenly felt a power suddenly appear behind him. Between the stars, Sumo actually took a step forward. At this time, Sumo's white robe was already torn, and there were traces of blood at the corner of his mouth. However, a cold light shot out from his eyes, and he held the Kuan Soul blade with both hands. Just now, he used the restriction of time, and combined it with the magical steps. It actually had a miraculous effect. Under the lotus power, he could actually shuttle through. Endless blade rays descended from the sky, heading straight for the back of the second swordsman's head. Wang Yu and Shen Ming were shocked, and their expressions turned from worry to joy. But the second swordsman's heart tightened. Supreme Lotus Technique. The Demon King of the Three Realms had actually mastered the space-time lotus technique. Otherwise, he would definitely not be able to escape from his hidden sword. It should be known that even ordinary lotus warriors would not be able to use that kind of space-time lotus technique. He could actually kill him? This was absolutely unexpected for the second swordsman. However, he was a lotus warrior after all. The moment his mind was alerted, a lotus flower had already appeared behind him. The celestial lotus protected the body. That was a realm that the current sumo could not reach. It was almost the instinct of a lotus warrior. Once the celestial lotus appeared, it was as if a world had descended. The lotus was there, and the person was there. Because the Tao lotus was the manifestation of their lotus heart. Boom! Sumo used almost all of his strength for this slash. Because he knew that there would not be many opportunities for him to slash like this. Therefore, he almost drained his Dansi to slash down with this slash. The Koan Soul Blade could break worlds. This was currently the greatest power that Sumo could unleash with the Koan Soul Blade. At this time, if the 5 poison realm was not destroyed, it would collapse again. With a loud boom, the entire starry sky seemed to be lifted up. Looking again, the Koan Soul Blade had split the lotus in half, and it was rapidly withering. Sumo swept across the starry sky like a giant comet. However, he did not have the chance to rush behind the second swordsman. The endless resistance caused his blade rays to suddenly dim. Although the lotus was split and withered, its vast power rebounded. Bang! Boom! In an instant, Sumo was like a kite with a broken string, directly bouncing dozens of miles away. In the void, he drew a long and narrow arc. At this time, the second swordsman had already turned around. His gaze was biting cold, and blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. In fact, he could not remember how many tens of thousands of years had passed since the last time he was injured. In the entire Izong world, the number of people that could injure him could be counted on one hand. That lotus was the manifestation of his lotus heart. Now that the lotus was broken, he was naturally injured. Sumo could actually break his lotus? Silver Moon Unity. The second swordsman's eyebrows twitched, and he let out a long howl. His voice shook the entire Glaze world's white South Star region. Looking again, 2 sword rays, one silver and one black, intertwined like 2 vast dragons, rushed through everything and headed straight for Sumo. Chapter 998. Silver Moon Fusion. The second swordsman unleashed his ultimate killer move. Before this, he never expected Sumo to be able to injure him. He never expected Sumo to force him to choose Silver Moon Fusion. Yin and Yang. The 2 Silver Moon swords were the 2 extremes of lightning. They intertwined with each other and flew towards Sumo with the rumbling of thunder. Hua, the galaxy was empty. Because the previous battle had cleared out all the dust in the galaxy. At this moment, other than the black hole in the center of the 5 poisons world, there was nothing else. But even in this empty galaxy, the Silver Moon swords still created a raging tide. At that moment, the 5 poisons world was like a dried-up riverbed. Although there were many cracks, dust was still swept up. Killing intent filled the air. Hurricanes surged. Actually, Sumo was sent flying by the Lotus power. But the Silver Moon swords reached her first. Its speed was unfathomable. Sumo saw the sword gleam. But now they did not have much power to resist. The sword gleam flew over. The forbidden map on Sumo could no longer be deduced. Just now, in order to block the sword, he had already activated the spacetime forbidden map. Now, he had no more techniques to use. But he still had Lianhua. Whoosh, a ray of golden light flew out from his cosmos sac. A broken copper bowl suddenly flew out. Then, it expanded with the wind and instantly turned into a huge cauldron that was hundreds of feet in size. Lianhua? At that moment, the second swordsman was speechless. How many pieces of Lianhua did the Demon King of the 3 realms have? He knew that Madame Scorpion had given her 2 pieces of lianbois to Sumo before she died. At that time, the second swordsman did not think much of it, because the newly obtained lianbois might not be of use to Sumo. But now, the second swordsman was worried, because Sumo had already used 4 pieces of lianbois. In theory, it wasn't something that an Exalt Realm cultivator could accomplish at all. But it happened to Sumo. Boom, however, there was no time for the swordsman to think. The tip of the Silver Moon sword had already hit the Soul Depository Cauldron. Fortunately, the Silver Moon sword did not disappoint the second swordsman. Although the Soul Depository Cauldron was a lianbois, it was not a pure defensive artifact. Sumo had no choice but to hurriedly take it out. However, how could it possibly block the Silver Moon Immortal Sword? Boom, clang, hum. The sword radiance in front of the Silver Moon Immortal Sword dimmed slightly. The Soul Depository Cauldron was sent flying. Although Sumo still had lianbois, it was too late to use it. The Yin-Yang Silver Moon was already in front of him. The red flowers scattered and the forbidden diagram shattered. All of Sumo's defenses collapsed at the last moment. The Silver Moon sword light was unstoppable. This time, Sumo didn't even have the chance to choose a lianbois to self-destruct. Wang Yu and Xin Ming couldn't even scream. Everything happened in an instant. Sumo didn't have any chance at all. That was the absolute gap between their realms. Even lianbois couldn't make up for it. Boom, crack, between the stars, only a loud noise was heard. This time, it was completely different from the previous one. The black and white light rose to the sky. The Silver Moon's sword let out an invincible dragon's roar. The second swordsman's frown was slightly relieved, because this time, he had definitely stabbed Sumo. The light dispersed. Looking again, there was a corpse floating in the void of the stars. The Silver Moon sword directly pierced through Sumo's body. Sumo, dressed in white, floated motionless in the void, his long ink-like hair hanging straight down. His aura seemed to have completely disappeared. Demon King. Wang Yu and Xin Ming's voices were trembling, because they really couldn't believe that this scene was real. Sumo's death meant that the dream of reviving the galaxy was completely shattered. Silver Moon, we can finally go home. The second swordsman heaved a long sigh. He looked at the scene in front of him without much joy. Instead, there was a trace of loneliness in his eyes. He had no grudge against the Demon King of the 3 realms, but killing was his mission. He was born to kill, because he was an assassin trained by the Black Blind Swordsman. In fact, Li Mu had long been tired of killing. But how difficult was it for him to be free? The tree longed for peace, but the wind never stopped. The Black Blind Swordsman would never let him go so easily, because the Black and White Swordsman was too valuable. Moreover, he was the second swordsman. Li Mu had mentioned many times that he wanted to retire. But the Black Blind Swordsman wouldn't agree. In the end, when he killed the 7th Lotus Warrior, the Black Blind Swordsman finally agreed to use the Silverfish token 3 more times. Once the 3rd Silverfish mission was completed, he would be set free. And Sumo would be his 3rd Silverfish mission. In the last 1,000,000 years, the second swordsman had been yearning to stop killing, because he had killed too many people. Today, he could finally do it. Countless times before, he had fantasized about the ecstasy and relief of completing the last Silverfish mission. But now that it was done, his heart was at peace. He even felt guilty and apologetic as he looked at Sumo's corpse. "I'm sorry, Demon King." The second swordsman shook his head helplessly at Sumo's corpse. "If you don't die, I won't be free. Between you and me, I can only choose myself. I hope that you can still be reincarnated." Explode. Li Mu raised an eyebrow and bellowed. With that, he retracted the Silver Moon sword. At the same time, he would completely vaporize Sumo's corpse. It seemed that the Demon King of the 3 realms was destined to perish among the stars. Wang Yu and Xin Ming's fused bodies trembled slightly. They didn't want to believe it. But then, Li Mu's jaw dropped and his face drained of color. Bang, whoosh, following the second swordsman's bellow, there was a loud noise. But it wasn't Sumo's corpse that shattered, but his silver moon sword. Lianbo shattered like a star. In that moment, the starry sky shone with a myriad of lights. At the same time, Sumo's body floated upright. The fragments of the silver moon's sword glittered around him. Sumo's eyes were closed, but his face was as white as a sheet. He seemed to have one foot in the door of death, the other still outside. However, he was surrounded by stars. He was like a sleeping prince. Sumo! Wang Yu and Shen Ming stared blankly at the scene. They didn't know if Sumo was dead or alive. The second swordsman Li Mu's eyes were filled with terror. What kind of power could shatter the silver moon he had cultivated for tens of thousands of years? Not even a high-level Lotus Knight could do it. And at this moment, outside the Five Poisons realm, and even outside the Lazuli realm and Izong realm, many forces were looking here. Because this place was emitting a power that didn't belong to this world. The Battle of the Lotus Knights had touched some taboos. Several unknown places cast their gazes toward the white South Star region of Lazuli. Previously, the destruction of the Five Poisons realm didn't cause any disturbance. But this moment was different. The silver moon shattered. Sumo's body suddenly glowed with endless white light. That halo covered everything, and his wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. And a white token floated in front of him. Chapter 999. White Mountain Decree. Not more than 3 inches long, not more than 3 fingers wide. Pure white as jade, but without a single word. On the token was a landscape painting, with mountains, rivers, and villages. Above the sea, white lotuses near, white mountains far away. At that moment, everything in the galaxy seemed to stop. The second-ranked swordsman Li Mu's expression was extremely ugly. Because, as a Lotus Knight, he recognized that token. Why would the White Mountain Decree be on Sumo's body? Why would he have the White Mountain Decree on him? Envoy of White Mountain. A thought flashed through Li Mu's mind, but he instantly rejected it. Because, if Sumo was the envoy of White Mountain, then Li Mu would have been killed long ago. He, a peak of the second tier of Lotus Knight, did not have the qualifications to act against the envoy of White Mountain. He would be killed in an instant. Wang Yu and Shen Ming stared blankly at everything. They had never seen the White Mountain Decree. Once, in the Wisdom Realm, when Sumo had fought against Lucidum, this White Mountain Decree had saved Sumo once, but they had not been present at the time. And now, Sumo's wound had completely healed. His face began to turn from white to red. Just now, Sumo was not breathing, but now his chest began to rise and fall slightly. At that moment, whether it was Li Mu, Wang Yu, or Shen Ming, they all once again felt Sumo's existence. Sumo was awakening. And right now, for Sumo it was a great dream. In the moment that the silver moon celestial sword was about to pierce through Sumo, Sumo's heart was filled with unwillingness. Because he had not become a Lotus Knight, he had not awakened Wu Air, he had not saved AMU, he had not recovered the galaxy. There were still many, many things he needed to do. But he did his best. In reality, he still had the 5-colored lotus that Li Shui had given him. That could instantly give him the battle power of a 5th-tier Lotus Knight, but Sumo had his pride, Sumo. That 5-colored lotus, unless he needed to save AMU, he would not use it. Even if it meant death. Puff, Sumo heard the sound of the silver moon immortal sword piercing through his body, and then he felt his soul start to float away. That was not an involuntary departure of his soul, but a forced one. However, Sumo felt that her soul had not dissipated. Everything around him disappeared. At that moment there was no smoke and dust in the 5 Poisons world in his eyes, no second swordsman, no Wang Yu, and no Shen Ming. In front of him was a huge white mountain. White Mountain! Sumo's heart skipped a beat. That was because he had seen this white mountain a long time ago. However, this was the first time he was so close to it. Between him and White Mountain, there was no sea, no lotus. He seemed to be standing at the foot of White Mountain. White Mountain was very tall, but Sumo couldn't see its peak even when she raised her head. There seemed to be a mountain gate in front of him, but that mountain gate was shrouded in immortal mist. There seemed to be words on the lintel of the door, but Sumo couldn't see what they were. At that moment, all of his divine sense was useless, and he was like a mortal standing in front of the gate of immortality. On both sides of the mountain gate there were 2 stone steels. They were very simple and unadorned, but one of them was about 3 zhang tall. The other was neatly cut at the waist, as if it was cut by a sharp blade. Strangely, there were no words on the 2 stone steels. However, Sumo suddenly felt that the half of the stone steel was somewhat familiar. 5 poisons divine steel. Sumo frowned. The 5 poisons divine steel that Madame Scorpion gave him before seemed to be the half of the steel that was cut off. Sumo really wanted to take out the 5 poisons divine steel to take a look. However, when he thought about it, the cosmos sack on him did not react at all. At this moment, he realized that he was a wandering soul. In theory, he should be dead. Sumo looked back again. Behind him was a vast and boundless sea. The waves were constantly crashing against the foot of the mountain. Strangely, Sumo didn't hear any sound. His current location was halfway up the mountain. Looking at the depths of the sea, he could see many lotus flowers. They were like small islands. The current Sumo already knew that every lotus flower was like a galaxy, a hidden world. White Mountain. Sumo was finally at the top of White Mountain. Turning around, Sumo looked at the mountain path leading to the mountain gate. They were all man-made and looked as smooth as a mirror. At the same time, they emitted a faint white mist. Sumo walked up the step. From where Sumo stood to the mountain gate, there were a total of 49 steps. Sumo walked up step by step. From what he saw, he was already climbing up continuously. However, after 7 or 8 steps, Sumo couldn't help but frown. Because, he suddenly realized that there were still 49 steps in front of him. Sumo couldn't help but turn back again. The scenery behind him was exactly the same as before. He actually did not move from his original position. Sumo was slightly startled. He looked at the mountain gate and walked up again. This time, Sumo walked 49 steps. However, the number of steps in front of him did not change at all. He was still standing in place. However, in Sumo's perception, he did walk up 49 steps. Illusion? Sumo stopped and looked at the mountain with a sigh. At that moment, he understood that he would never be able to climb this white mountain. However, he also felt that everything around him was real. That should not be an illusion. This was definitely a magical world. Sumo stopped, and then he wanted to walk back. There was still a path behind him. However, the result was the same as before. No matter how he walked, he did not move. At that moment, Sumo seemed to be sealed in a special time and space, unable to advance or retreat. He even used his mystical footwork to do so. Normally, 1 step was a world. However, he felt that he had taken a step, but he was still in the same place. Phew! Sumo let out a deep breath of turbid air. He felt a sense of powerlessness that he had never felt before. White Mountain. Everything in front of him was like a nightmare. He could not wake up and he could not get out. And at this moment, the voices of 2 boys came. Those 2 voices were not heard by Sumo, because they seemed to be directly transmitted to Sumo's heart. Sumo could vaguely make out 2 indistinct silhouettes within the mountain gate. They were not tall and should be 2 children. There's a person there? One of them said. The other boy also noticed Sumo. Who are you? The first boy's voice was filled with childishness, but it also carried a tone of seniority. I am the demon king of the 3 realms, Sumo. Sumo was overjoyed and replied with the voice in his heart. The demon king of the 3 realms? Sumo? The 2 boys' voices were somewhat hesitant. Senior brother, have you heard of this name? The first boy asked. No. The other boy seemed to shake his head. The mortals of the lower realm are as numerous as ants. How would I know about the demon king of the 3 realms? I can't even count the realm lotuses. That's true, the first boy said, but why is he standing at our mountain gate? How would I know? The other boy said. How about we ask the ancestral master? The ancestral master doesn't have time to care about mortal matters. I think we should just send him away. He is neither human nor ghost nor soul. He definitely can't enter the mountain gate. All right. The first boy smiled. What realm, what monarch, your cultivation is not up to par, go back. Sumo really wanted to ask. However, the illusory boy only waved his sleeves lightly. Phew, Sumo only felt the world change, and the wind blew everywhere. He was already completely unaware of everything. However, in an instant, he seemed to feel his wounds were healing bit by bit. He heard the sound of his own breathing. Chapter 1000. Breathe, breathe, breathe. Sometimes, a person's breathing could be the most beautiful music. Right now, Sumo's breathing was exactly that. Wang Yu and Xin Ming's faces were filled with surprise. The second-ranked swordsman Li Mu's face was extremely solemn. The entire galaxy was eerily quiet, only Sumo's breathing could be heard. The white mountain token, like a guardian, quietly floated in front of Sumo. At that moment, no one dared to approach Sumo. The white mountain token the worlds avoided. Sumo also felt it. Even though he didn't open his eyes, he could feel everything. He returned to the 5 poison world. The trip to White Mountain just now was like a dream. But Sumo still couldn't move. There were no wounds on his body. In reality, the sword just now had pierced through his body, even hurting his immortal heart. But right now, Sumo was as good as new. But he couldn't move. Sumo felt like he didn't have any strength left in his body. His Dan-si was locked by a mysterious power. This power was exactly the same as the one emitted by the illusory boy. And right now, above his Dan-si, was the lotus seed that Madame Scorpion gave him. It was a real lotus seed, emitting a faint greenish-white light. Whoosh, whoosh. Right now, Sumo's Dan-si was surging with waves, and there was an inexplicable wind coming from nowhere. Small waves became big waves became giant waves. Sumo could see that in just a few breaths, his Dan-si was surging with monstrous waves. The lotus seed floated in the void of the Dan-si, tens of thousands of feet high. Those waves, like a hurricane, rose up and headed straight for the lotus seed. But the lotus seed was motionless in the void. It was an extremely beautiful scene. Whoosh! The waves of Sumo's Dan-si, layer by layer, finally landed on the lotus seed. In an instant, the lotus seed glowed brightly. Sumo understood that those waves were not real waves, but endless spiritual energy. They were nourishing the lotus seed. Bang! With a soft sound, the lotus seed exploded in an instant. Then, like falling stars, they scattered across the Dan-si. Whoosh! 1,000 falling stars. The huge waves that were already tens of thousands of feet high suddenly turned into a heavy rain that poured down from the sky. At that moment, Sumo felt herself falling as well. With a boom, countless waves splashed in the Pill Sea. Subsequently, Sumo's entire Dan-si shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. A whirlpool appeared in the center of the Dan-si. The whirlpool spun faster and faster, and its depth grew deeper and deeper. It was like a bottomless black hole that wanted to swallow all the seawater. No one knew how long the process lasted. Sumo felt like she was sleeping and waking up and sleeping again. Above the Dan-si, it was bright and dark, dark and bright. It was as if the sun was rising and the moon was setting, an endless cycle of dawn and dusk. Time will always be like this. It could transform into an instant, or it could transform into 10,000 years. Because someone once said that time doesn't exist. In the end, Sumo's Dan-C was reduced to the size of an abbot, and there was an incomparably deep black hole in it. Sumo felt a little thirsty, as if he was in a desert. His Dan-C was about to dry up. At this moment, the black hole was no longer spinning. Sumo wanted to struggle because he was too sad. He wanted to drink some water. His entire person seemed to be about to be sucked dry. When would that black hole be filled? And at this moment, the black hole actually began to spray out lines of water. At first, there were only a few strands, but they gradually became streams. Gurgle, gurgle. The water became a spring, and then it kept surging up. Layer after layer, stacked on top of each other. The spring water gushed out in all directions, covered the entire black hole. The black hole was gone, and there was only a spring with a green light. Moreover, the spring kept rising, and in the end, it reached a total of 49 layers, 49 feet. At the same time, Sumo's Dan-C was recovering. At that moment, Sumo finally woke up. The hunger and thirst just now gradually subsided. Boom, a splash. Suddenly, a ball of green light leaped up from the spring water, directly rising to a height of 3 feet. Then, it began to germinate, spread its leaves, whip, and bud. It was a new lotus. Sumo's heart suddenly trembled. Because at that moment, he suddenly felt as if his entire body had been reborn. That lotus belonged to him. The lotus grew rapidly. In just a moment it had already begun to bloom. In an instant tens of thousands of rays of light shone on the entire Dan-C. Sumo's Dan-C began to expand at an unprecedented speed. The waves and tides seemed to have opened up a new world. The lotus vines swayed, emitting bursts of delicate fragrance. Endless fragrance wafted over the sea. Sumo had smelled that fragrance before. His Dan-C seemed to be forming a new perfume sea. Lotuses grew on the sea, and lotuses adorned the sea. It was an incomparably magnificent existence. Then, endless lotus power began to directly pour into Sumo's limbs and bones. Bones refining, marrow cleansing, spirit concentration. In fact, all of these were experiences that Sumo had experienced before. But this time, it was completely different. Sumo seemed to have stepped through a door and entered a completely different world. That feeling was indescribable and indescribable. To be precise, all of Sumo's previous cultivation was an awakening. Because, originally, he was at the peak of the Venerable Realm. Cultivation in the Izong world was nothing new to him. He was just walking the same path again, but it was different this time. Now, he finally achieved a qualitative leap. Lotus Realm. That was the realm above the Venerable Realm that the Venerables spoke of in the 3 realms. It was the realm that Sumo had dreamed of when he learned of the existence of Lotus scholars in the Izong world. At that moment, Sumo's heart and body were suddenly enlightened. At this time, Sumo did not know how much time had passed, but in the eyes of Li Mu, Wang Yu, and Shun Ming, it was actually only a moment. The white mountain token had been emitting a dazzling light. The white light shone on Sumo's body. They did not know what exactly happened to Sumo's body, but they could vaguely feel that Sumo had changed. Because, at this time, the void around Sumo was shrouded by a layer of indistinct water vapor. Everything around him had undergone a special change. Lotus Chi. Ha! The second swordsman, Li Mu, looked at the light and water vapor around Sumo and smiled bitterly. He could not explain why. Because there was still a long way to go from the peak of the Venerable Realm to the Lotus Realm. Even if Sumo had the Lotus Seed, it was impossible for him to change. But he knew that Sumo had transformed into a lotus. Demon King, you are indeed a person of great fortune. Li Mu let out a long sigh. Some things and some people were special existences of this vast universe. In fact, at that moment, Li Mu still had a chance to escape. But he did not choose to leave. The black and white swordsman had his own belief. He was an assassin and a swordsman. As long as the sword existed, he existed. If the sword died, he died. Whoosh! At this time, Sumo had already opened his eyes. A beam of light appeared directly above his head. The light shot straight into the starry sky. A lotus phantom appeared in the starry sky, and the entire glazed white south starfield could see that phantom. Whoosh! When they looked again, Sumo's figure suddenly moved. The Koan soul saber was already in his hand. The current Koan soul saber was definitely different from before. The saber light sword and the white flame was at least 100 feet. Slash! Sumo held the saber with one hand and slashed at the swordsman, Li Mu. At that moment, Li Mu did not dodge. Because he did not kill Sumo, the moment the silver moon immortal sword shattered, his life would lose meaning. Li Mu smiled and waited for death. He knew that he would die without a doubt. Puff! Sumo did not show any mercy. Because this person had already killed him once. Li Mu was directly slashed in half, and instantly scattered into the starry sky. Sigh! At this moment, a sorrowful sigh came from within vast universe. Chapter 1001. Life was long. Death was but an instant. The second-rank swordsman, Li Mu, had cultivated for millions of years. From a child cultivator to a lotus knight, it was a process that he dared not look back on lightly. Many memories were already blurred. Many things were already forgotten. However, in the moment of his death, Li Mu had no regrets. Because he longed for the future, but was also prepared to die at any moment. Who asked him to be a killer? But when a person died, there would always be people who shed tears, or at least sighed. A black-robed cultivator stood on the outskirts of the glaze world's Binance starfield. His figure was slender and tall. In the vast universe, he stood alone in the void, looking especially small and lonely. His eye sockets were empty. He was blind. The black blind monk. He had seen everything just now. Even if he had no eyes, his heart was not blind. Li Mu was one of his trump cards. To tell the truth, although the black blind monk was somewhat mentally prepared, he still couldn't believe it when Sumo transformed into a lotus and Li Mu died. Sumo had killed Li Mu, who was at the peak of the second lotus night realm. Li Mu hadn't completed the last silverfish token? The black blind monk knew what Li Mu was thinking. He was willing to give Li Mu his final freedom. However, all of this was impossible. The black blind monk sighed deeply. Unfortunately, his eye sockets were empty. He couldn't shed tears. I'm sorry, the black blind monk said gravely. There were a total of 13 black and white swordsmen. Now, nearly half of them had died at Sumo's hands. Apart from the first-rank swordsman, he could no longer send out black and white swordsmen. But Sumo transforming into a lotus was the last thing he wanted to see. That was the Heartless King's bottom line. The White Mountain Token. This variable was indeed not within the Black Blind Monk's calculations, nor was it within the Heartless King's plans. Because White Mountain didn't care about the world devouring. But everything that had happened to Sumo must have had something to do with White Mountain. The Black Blind Monk's footsteps paused, then he headed straight for the glaze world's Binance starfield. The Black Blind Monk didn't seem to use any formations. He had already entered the Binance starfield with one step. He was ready to act himself, because they couldn't wait any longer. Sumo's lotus form had truly ignited the flames of recovery for the three realms and the Milky Way. It was no longer a single spark, but a vast grassland that was set ablaze. If this fire was not extinguished, then there was no way to purify it. If Sumo were to find AMU, then these two lotus souls would definitely allow the three realms galaxy to be reborn. If that happened, all their efforts would be in vain. Therefore, while Sumo's condition was not stable, the Black Blind Master had to take a risk out of desperation. As long as Sumo died, everything else would be easy to handle. Thus, the Black Blind Grandmaster wanted to go straight to the Five Poison World. However, as soon as he entered the glazed white South Star territory, he was blocked by a crescent moon. The crescent moon was like a hook hanging in the starry sky. The Black Blind Warrior couldn't help but raise his brows, because the entire glazed white Southern Star region's star chart was in his heart. There weren't any stars on the path he took. However, in the distance, a crescent moon abruptly appeared on his path. It blocked his path of advance. Black Blind Hercules stopped in his tracks and turned around. He wanted to change his route. However, as soon as he took a step, the crescent moon from just now appeared in his new direction. Hee. The Black Blind Warrior didn't turn around this time. Instead, he smiled politely and said, "Which expert is blocking this one's path? If it is possible, please be magnanimous. This one will pass by and will not disturb the peace of the glazed white world." The Black Blind Warrior's words were very polite, because he didn't want to complicate matters. However, the crescent moon didn't answer him at all. The Black Blind Warrior raised his head. His empty eye sockets suddenly emitted a black light. It was like two black pupils suddenly appeared. However, he couldn't help but turn his head, because in the world of his perception, that crescent moon actually reflected back an extremely blinding light. Those two beams of light nearly injured his divine soul. The Black Blind Warrior's expression changed. At the same time, his voice suddenly turned cold. "If you don't show yourself, then this one will force his way through." Whoosh! The Black Blind Warrior's black clothes flapped, and he looked like a huge black bat. Thousands of black winds suddenly swirled under his armpits. The black winds howled, and like a black storm that appeared in the universe, it swept towards the crescent moon. The Black Blind Warrior was a Lotus Scholar level 7. In the entire Izong world, there weren't many cultivators that could compete with him. Even Lucidum and Immortal Lotus of the Sanskrit world together weren't his match. And the Black Blind Warrior already couldn't remember how long it had been since he last fought. This time, if the situation wasn't urgent, he wouldn't have personally made a move. Whoosh! The black wind could definitely shatter stars. If this black wind blew on the Five Poisons world before, it could directly blow away all the stars in the Five Poisons world. One wind could destroy an entire world. The Black Blind Warrior's methods could be said to be all-knowing. Therefore, according to the Black Blind Warrior's thinking, unless he didn't make a move, as long as he made a move, then nothing could stop him. However, an accident occurred. His black wind blew in front of the crescent moon, but it didn't shake the crescent moon. Instead, it gradually dissipated. This was the third time the Black Blind Warrior exclaimed in surprise. Originally, he was prepared to follow the black wind straight to the Five Poisons world. However, his black wind didn't work. This could be said to be a situation that he had never encountered before. Fa Lotus King Realm? The Black Blind Warrior couldn't help but inwardly suck in a breath of cold air. However, he immediately calmed down, because that was simply impossible. In the Izong world, it was absolutely impossible for two Fa Lotus King Realm cultivators to appear, because that was the law of vast universe. But the Black Blind Warrior suddenly thought of a possibility, and his expression couldn't help but change once again. This time, the change was even more serious than before. Moreover, the Black Blind Warrior didn't make another move. Heaven hook like the moon. At this time, he finally thought of a person. Black Blind, I didn't know that Mr. Ren had arrived. The Black Blind Warrior cupped his fists towards the void and coldly said, My apologies. When he looked again, an image appeared in the void. In the image, a cultivator appeared. He was wearing cloth clothes and a conical bamboo hat. He was barefoot, holding a fishing rod. That was the East Fence Village's Mr. Ren. However, that was only an image, not his real body. Warrior, I trust you have been well. With the conical bamboo hat covering half of his face, Mr. Ren smiled lightly. Thanks to Mr. Ren, I have been well. The black blind warrior said, however, Mr. Ren, why are you blocking my way instead of fishing at the observation lake? I remember that you can't leave the town. Warrior, don't talk nonsense. Mr. Ren laughed. I didn't leave the town. Right now, I'm at the observation lake, not daring to slack off. Mr. Ren, let's not beat around the bush. You are the multi-realm enforcer, my attack is ineffective against you. However, why do you care about this Izong world, and use the heaven hook to block my way? Warrior! Mr. Ren was silent for a moment. Actually, I was saving you. Because, if I didn't block you, I'm afraid that the other people in the town would have come down to look for you. They don't care about their lives. Chapter 1002. The rest of the town wants to come down? Hearing Mr. Ren's words, Black Blind Taoist could not help but frown. This was because he used to be in Luofan Town. Those who could have a place in Luofan Town were all powerful people. However, the people of the town absolutely could not leave the town casually. Mr. Ren's identity was that of a law enforcer. Even he could not leave the village casually, let alone other cultivators. Thinking of this, Black Blind Taoist could not help but sneer. Mr. Ren, you actually dare to say such a lie if you want to stop me? Which village cultivator of Luofan Town will come down? Galaxy Village? Black Blind Taoist shook his head. Galaxy Village is still too young. Izong had an agreement with the Galaxy Village cultivators. They would not dare to easily leave the village. Taking a step back, Galaxy Village has some amazing people, but they are not enough to control the overall situation. Even if they come, I, Black Blind Taoist, am not afraid. Hearing this, Mr. Ren could not help but shake his head. Taoist, if the people of Galaxy Village want to come, I really will not stop you. Because, most likely, they will still let you live. However, I am not talking about the people of Galaxy Village. Black Blind Taoist raised his eyebrows. His empty eye sockets seemed to slightly narrow. There are not many villages in the town. The people of East Border Village should not find trouble with me. The two old ancestors of Broken Sleeve Village also do not have the leisure to do that. There are also a few deserted villages. Deserted villages? Mr. Ren laughed. Taoist, you really have not returned to the town for too long. Some deserted villages are no longer deserted villages. What do you mean? Black Blind Taoist asked. The people of Windwheel Village have already reincarnated and returned. Mr. Ren said. Windwheel lineage? Black Blind Taoist's voice was somewhat strange. Because he knew what the Windwheel lineage meant, and what kind of people the Windwheel lineage was. How did they complete it? You should know that their Windwheel lineage is missing one person. The Black Blind Great Scholar asked. Back then, the entire Windwheel lineage was reincarnated. They didn't even leave a single guide behind. In the past, we all thought that they were suicidal descending to the lower realms. Young Master Ren said. I don't know exactly how they came back, but I don't know. However, it must be related to Sumo. Because the person they lack is Sumo. Sumo is the youngest disciple of the Windwheel faction. This is what someone from the Windwheel faction told me personally. What? It was the first time that Black Blind Mountain knew about Sumo's identity. In this way, the Windwheel Village would definitely be one of the biggest obstacles for them to purify Izong. Windmill by Yifeng asked me to pass a message to you. If the Black Lotus faction really dares to touch her junior brother, she will leave Fallen Mortal Town and descend to the lower realm again. Great Scholar, you should understand what it means to descend again. Bai Yifeng. The Black Blind Great Scholar said these 3 words heavily. She is a lunatic. Doesn't she know what it means to descend? Also, Mr. Ren, your Eastern Hedge faction is the law enforcer of various realms. How can you let her descend so casually? Bai Shan won't agree. Mr. Ren laughed. Great scholar, the Windwheel faction is originally a bunch of lunatics. Otherwise, why would the entire village commit suicide and descend to the lower realm? Bai Yifeng will do what she said. She is a descender and isn't considered scary. However, if the entire Windwheel faction descend to the lower realm, then it won't be easy to clean up. Our Eastern Hedge faction may not be able to stop them. Don't forget, the Windwheel faction was said to be the closest existence to Bai Shan. Bai Shan's attitude towards the Windwheel faction has always been somewhat unfathomable. So, I said that I stopped you today to save you, am I wrong? It's me now. If Bai Yifeng comes, I'm afraid the entire Glaze world won't be able to survive. Hee hee. Black Blind Scholar laughed coldly. Mr. Ren, no matter how powerful the Windwheel faction is, it's impossible for him to observe the various realms all the time. Those who have such ability are all your Eastern Hedge faction's people. So, don't say that you're helping me, you're helping the Windwheel faction. I don't believe that the Windwheel faction can let him be reborn after I kill Sumo. The Windwheel faction can't. Mr. Ren laughed lightly. But it doesn't mean that Bai Shan can't. Didn't the number 2 swordsman kill Sumo just now? But what's the result? Once the Bai Shan token is used, Sumo can't be killed at all. Great scholar, judge the situation. You should understand that Sumo can't be killed. Black Blind Scholar didn't speak. Also, Mr. Ren continued, I didn't help the Windwheel faction. I only helped Bai Yifeng. Hearing this, Black Blind Scholar couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Then, he couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. Black Blind Scholar knew that the Eastern Hedge law enforcers were all great loners. He absolutely didn't expect that Mr. Ren, the most indifferent person in the Eastern Hedge faction, would actually say those words just now. At the same time, these words were enough to explain Mr. Ren's position. Black Blind Scholar understood that no matter what, he couldn't kill Sumo today. Because he couldn't get through Mr. Ren, not to mention the fact that Sumo had the support of the Windwheel faction. Congratulations, Mr. Ren. You may have a chance to obtain the true method. Black Blind Scholar cupped his hands towards Mr. Ren and then turned around. However, he still listened to the footsteps and said coldly, Mr. Ren, the heartless Dharmaraja won't give up. If he can leave the town, then he has the ability to return to the town. Even if it ends up in the White Mountain, we will fight with all our strength. Ha ha. Mr. Ren nodded. Luo Fan Town, we await your arrival at any time. Black Blind Scholar didn't say anything else. He took a step and directly left the glazed white South Star region, disappearing without a trace. Alas! Mr. Ren raised his bamboo hat. His eyes were clear and complicated. Mr. Ren looked in the direction where Black Blind Scholar disappeared, and let out a long sigh. Scholar, I'm afraid that the heavenly change is coming. Take care of yourself. The 5 Poisons star boundary no longer existed. Sumo killed Swordsman Li Mu with 1 slash and then looked around. Whoosh! The combined bodies of Wang Yu and Xin Ming suddenly separated. They moved at the same time and appeared in front of Sumo. Sumo. Demon King. I'm fine. Sumo smiled faintly. This is a blessing in disguise. If not for Madame Scorpion's lotus seed, I probably wouldn't have been able to become a Lotus Knight so quickly. Wang Yu and Xin Ming nodded. Unfortunately, the 5 Poisons realm, Madame Scorpion, Green Snake, and the others had all turned into dust in the vast universe. They had existed in this world and left behind stories. Perhaps this was the process of life. What was once the 5 Poisons realm was only a black hole. Sumo, what should we do next? Wang Yu asked. According to the original plan, go to the Southern Abyss Sea and then look for AMU. Sumo said. Okay. Wang Yu and Xin Ming nodded. They had already searched the 13 dark worlds on the way to the Southern Abyss Sea marked on Murong Haiching's star map. Therefore, they did not stay in the galaxy for long. The three of them disappeared and went straight to the southern abyss sea. Not long after they left, a man dressed in earthen yellow clothes gradually appeared in the interstellar space. He was tall and slender. He wore a pair of wooden clogs on his feet and a wooden ruler on his waist. He also wore a wooden mask on his face. The pattern on the mask was that of a ferocious beast. The masked man looked in the direction where Sumo and the others disappeared, but did not say anything. Then, he took out the ruler on his waist and pointed at the black hole in the five poisons realm. Whoosh, the black hole disappeared in an instant. End of volume. Chapter 1003. The Southern Abyss Sea was located in the center of the glazed white South Star region. According to the star map, Sumo, Wang Yu, and Shen Ming had already arrived at the interstellar space marked on the map. On the star map, the Southern Abyss Sea was a world of its own. There were no small worlds in the surrounding interstellar space. Ji Guang's star map and Murong Haiqing's star map were completely the same in the Southern Abyss Sea's position. However, neither Sumo, Wang Yu, nor Shen Ming saw the so-called Southern Abyss Sea. They knew that the so-called sea might not be a sea in the interstellar space. However, the Demon Eye and Ghost Eye were activated at the same time. All they could see was the vast starry sky. There were no stars or celestial forms. This interstellar space seemed to be completely empty. Sumo, there seems to be nothing here. Wang Yu frowned. Yes. Sumo nodded. Demon King, didn't you say that only Lotus Warriors can be seen in the Southern Abyss Sea? Now that you're a Lotus Warrior, why don't you see the Southern Abyss Sea? Shen Ming asked. I can't say for sure now. Let's observe for a while more. Maybe we'll find something, Sumo said. Yes. Wang Yu and Shen Ming both nodded. In fact, even if Wang Yu and Shen Ming were at the 9 levels of Rebirth Realm, they could spread their divine senses thousands of miles away. Now, the entire interstellar space was empty. There was nothing. However, they all believed that Ji Guang and Murong Haiqing's map could not be wrong. Otherwise, why would the Southern Abyss Sea be marked at the same time? It could only be said that this was a special place. Unfortunately, the two star maps did not clearly state the characteristics of the Southern Abyss Sea. Therefore, Sumo and the other two decided to stay in this star region for a while. They walked for a few more days in the vast interstellar space, but they did not find anything special. However, as great cultivators, they were extremely patient. In the end, they each took out their Dharma treasures. Then, they began to cultivate in this star region. What Sumo took out was naturally the Lotus Throne. Wang Yu took out a praying mat. It seemed that Wang Yu often meditated and cultivated. As soon as the prayer mat appeared, it expanded to a size of several hundred feet, resembling a floating continent. Shen Ming did not take out his Dharma treasure. She and Wang Yu sat back to back, cultivating and meditating. This was also the most common cultivation method the sisters used after they got together, because this way they could take care of each other. Most importantly, they could fuse at the fastest speed and possess the strongest combat power. In the blink of an eye, 300 years had passed. Even though 100 years was nothing to Sumo and the others, it was nothing. However, they had stayed for a long time. However, they found nothing. Sis, could we have made a mistake? I don't see any changes in the surroundings at all. No matter how I look at it, there doesn't seem to be a sea of stars here. Shen Ming said. Wang Yu shook his head. I can't be wrong. Don't you think it's strange? We've rarely seen such a spacious and clean star region along the way. This star region is too pure, so pure that it's a bit abnormal. What do you think? Oh! Shen Ming tilted his head and pondered. Sis, now that you mention it, it seems so. There isn't even any interstellar dust here. We've been meditating for 300 years, but we haven't seen anything. That's right. So, there must be some special power here, Wang Yu said. Sumo naturally heard the sisters' conversation. However, Sumo sat cross-legged on the lotus throne and didn't say anything, because she was sensing a strange power rising in the distant starry sky. At this moment, the entire starry sky was extremely spacious and empty. The area Sumo had detected could contain dozens of small worlds. This was the area marked on the two-star map. It could be said that if the Southern Abyss Sea really existed, it would be an extremely vast existence. The stars were like small islands within it. In fact, Sumo and Wang Yu had the same opinion. They both firmly believed that the Southern Abyss Sea existed. It was just that they hadn't discovered it yet. Whoosh, whoosh, at this moment, Sumo's ears moved slightly, because he heard the strange sound of waves. Wang Yu, did you hear that? Sumo asked. What? Wang Yu looked at Sumo. The sound of waves, Sumo said and looked in the direction of the sound. Now, Sumo was already in the first stage of the Lotus Realm. His magic eye could see through the entire Glaze Realm. However, he only heard the sound of waves but didn't see any waves. I didn't hear anything. Wang Yu shook his head. I didn't hear anything either, Shen Ming said. At the same time, Wang Yu also looked in the direction that Sumo was looking at, but she also didn't see anything. Sumo nodded. He understood now. Back then, the Linen Fairy Lotus said that only Lotus warriors could see the Southern Abyss Sea. Because the sound of waves was getting closer and closer, as if thousands of tides were rushing over. He could hear it clearly, but Wang Yu and Shen Ming couldn't even hear the sound. That was the difference caused by their realms. Demon King, did you see the Southern Abyss Sea? Shen Ming asked. Not yet, Sumo said, but I heard the sound of waves. It will be here soon. The Southern Abyss Sea seems to be a flowing sea. A flowing sea? Shen Ming frowned and thought to himself, is there still a sea that doesn't flow? However, Shen Ming immediately understood what Sumo meant. The flowing here meant that the entire Southern Abyss Sea existed in the vast universe. The Southern Abyss Sea wasn't fixed in the same star region. Of course, this was probably just Sumo's speculation. Because this could explain why Sumo and the others didn't sense the Southern Abyss Sea previously. Whoosh, whoosh, at this moment, the sound of waves became clearer in Sumo's ears. At the same time, he finally saw a ray of white light in the galaxy. It appeared in front of Sumo on the left. That ray of light was like the boundary between the sea and the sky. At first, it was just a line. However, it gradually turned into endless white waves. That's right. The white waves were monstrous and swept over. They rumbled with the sound of rushing thunder. Sumo's eyes narrowed slightly. All of you, come up to my lotus platform. Sumo said to Wang Yu and Shen Ming, Hai Shui will be here soon. Wang Yu and Shen Ming didn't see Hai Shui, but they listened to Sumo. So, they put away the cattail hassock and went up to Sumo's lotus platform. As soon as they got on the lotus platform, they felt the lotus platform shake slightly. Huh! Wang Yu and Shen Ming were a little surprised. Hai Shui is here, Sumo said lightly. At this moment, in Sumo's eyes, the surrounding galaxy had completely turned into a boundless sea. Their lotus platform was like a lonely boat on the sea. At the same time, dense fog rose from the sea, suddenly making it look mysterious. At this moment, Sumo felt as if he was in a different world. He wasn't in the galaxy at all, but on a sea. Just when Sumo was a little surprised, there was suddenly a song coming from the depths of the sea. There seemed to be a small boat in the distance. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.